My husband declared that starting this month, we will each manage our own money because he is sick of supporting me. I happily agreed, and as usual, when he thought he had won, he had actually handed me the keys to my absolute freedom. My name is Vanessa, and I am 33 years old. Today, my husband Bradley tried to financially ruin me in our custom kitchen. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had a partner underestimate your worth and mistake your silence for weakness. Growing up in a modest household, I always believed marriage was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared burdens. That was the dream I thought I was living when I married Bradley 5 years ago. We bought a beautiful four-bedroom house in a pristine suburban neighborhood. It had gleaming hardwood floors, marble countertops, and a spacious two-car garage. But beneath the polished veneer of our upper-middle-class life, resentment had been brewing for a long time. Bradley is 36 years old and a corporate sales director. He wears tailored suits, drives a luxury sedan, and thrives on the power dynamics of his cutthroat corporate world. Unfortunately, he started bringing that same aggressive cutthroat energy into our marriage. It was a Tuesday evening when the fragile facade of our partnership completely shattered. I was standing at the kitchen island wiping down the marble countertops after dinner. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Suddenly, the heavy oak door leading to the garage slammed open. Bradley marched into the kitchen, his jaw set in a rigid line, his eyes dark with a calculated anger. He did not say hello. He did not ask about my day. Instead, he slammed a thick stack of papers onto the pristine counter with so much force that my coffee mug rattled against the granite. I looked down and saw pages upon pages of highlighted budget spreadsheets. Every line item, every utility bill, every grocery run from the past 4 years had been meticulously categorized and color-coded. I stared at the aggressive neon yellow and pink highlights, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Before I could even ask what this was about, Bradley delivered his ultimatum. His voice was entirely devoid of warmth. He stood tall, crossing his arms over his expensive dress shirt, looking down at me as if I were a failing employee rather than his wife. Vanessa, he began, his tone dripping with absolute disdain. I am cutting you off. Starting this month, we will each manage our own money. I am completely sick of supporting you and your little homemade lotion hobby. It is draining my hard-earned salary, and I refuse to carry your dead weight any longer. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. My little homemade lotion hobby. That was how he referred to the business I had been pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into for the past 4 years. When I first told Bradley I wanted to create an organic skincare line, he had patted me on the head and called it a cute project to keep me busy. I had converted our spacious two-car garage into a makeshift laboratory and shipping center. I endured freezing winters wrapped in 3 layers of sweaters, just to keep the product formulas stable because he refused to let me install a proper space heater. I suffered through sweltering summers with only a cheap box fan circulating the humid air while I packed hundreds of shipping boxes by hand. I sacrificed sleep, I sacrificed friendships, and I sacrificed my own comfort to nurture this business. I worked through weekends, skipped holidays, and poured every ounce of my energy into building my brand from the ground up. But to Bradley, because I was not putting on a power suit and commuting to a downtown high-rise, my work was entirely invalid. He paced back and forth across the kitchen floor, building momentum for his prepared speech. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to be the sole provider for this household? He demanded, pointing an accusing finger at the spreadsheets. For 4 years, I have paid the mortgage. I have paid the electricity. I have paid for the internet you use to play business owner out there in the garage. You mix your little creams and package your little boxes, and what do you have to show for it? Absolutely nothing. You contribute nothing to this household, and I am tired of funding your fantasy. While I was pouring every cent back into raw materials and marketing, he was buying $1,000 golf clubs and treating his subordinates to expensive steak dinners just to stroke his own ego. He lived for the image of success while I was actually building the foundation for it. I stood there maintaining my composure, though my heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply let him speak, knowing that reacting emotionally was exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to beg. He wanted me to defend myself. He wanted to feel the rush of power that came from putting me in my place. "When you married me, you promised we were a team," I said quietly, testing the waters to see how far he was willing to take this. "A team requires two contributing players, Vanessa." He shot back immediately, his face flushing with arrogant superiority. "You are not a player. You are a dependent. My colleagues at the firm go on luxury vacations with their wives who actually bring in six-figure salaries. Meanwhile, I am stuck subsidizing a 33-year-old woman who plays with essential oils all day. I am done subsidizing your delusions. It stops today." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek, heavy manila envelope. He tossed it onto the spreadsheets. It landed with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the kitchen. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," he announced, a smug, victorious smile creeping onto his face. "I had my lawyer draft it up this week. It is ironclad. From this day forward, our finances are 100% separate. Every asset, every debt, every single dollar of income we generate will belong solely to the person who earned it. I am no longer legally or financially responsible for you in any way, shape, or form." He leaned against the counter, invading my personal space, trying to intimidate me with his physical presence. "You keep whatever pennies you make from your garage hobby, and I keep my corporate salary, my bonuses, and my investments. We split the household bills down the middle. If you cannot afford your half of the mortgage, then you will have to figure it out or move out. My name is the primary one on the deed anyway. I am protecting my future, Vanessa, because clearly you are never going to contribute to it." I looked down at the legal document. The crisp white paper was filled with dense legal jargon, explicitly designed to sever our financial ties completely and permanently. Bradley had clearly spent a significant amount of money to have this drawn up. He had calculated this move carefully. He thought he was trapping me. He thought he was leaving me destitute, forcing me to either beg for his charity or abandon my dreams and get a minimum wage job just to survive in his house. What Bradley did not know was that my silence was not shock. It was not devastation. My silence was the sound of a trap snapping shut around him. For the past 4 years, I had kept my business finances completely separate from our joint accounts, quietly reinvesting every single dollar of profit back into the company to fuel its exponential growth. I never asked him for business capital. I never showed him my profit and loss statements, because every time I tried to talk about my company, he would roll his eyes and change the subject. His arrogant lack of interest had been my greatest shield. He had no idea what was actually happening in that garage. He had no idea that my little homemade lotion hobby was actually a company called Botanica Pure. He had no idea that a video of my organic night serum had gone wildly viral on social media 6 months ago, sparking a global frenzy that completely sold out my inventory in 3 hours. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent the entire morning on a highly confidential video call with the executive board of the Lumiere Group, a massive international cosmetics conglomerate. I looked from the post-nuptial agreement up to Bradley's smug, expectant face. He was waiting for the tears. He was waiting for the panic. I took a slow, steady breath. "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want, Bradley?" I asked, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of emotion. "Are you sure you want 100% separate finances with no claim to anything I earn from this day forward?" He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the large kitchen. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Vanessa. Sign the paper." I carefully reviewed the final clauses, making absolutely certain there were no loopholes that would grant him access to my corporate assets. The lawyer he hired was aggressive but predictably standard, ensuring a clean total break of all financial communion. It was exactly the kind of document my own corporate lawyers would have drafted to protect a major shareholder. I did not argue. I did not hesitate. I reached across the marble counter and picked up the expensive silver pen he had laid out for me. I flipped to the last page of the document where the little flags indicated my required signature. The legal language was incredibly clear. Neither party would have any right, title, or interest in the separate property or future income of the other. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a smooth, elegant flourish. Bradley's smile widened into a triumphant grin. He snatched the document back as if afraid I might change my mind. He looked at my signature like he had just won the lottery. Finally, he breathed out, sliding the paperwork back into his briefcase. "Welcome to the real world, Vanessa. It is time to grow up and pay your own way." He turned on his heel and walked out of the kitchen, his expensive leather shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He was walking away a victorious man, completely convinced he had just secured his wealth and put his freeloading wife in her place. I stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. On the counter face down, my phone screen suddenly lit up with a silent notification. It buzzed softly against the marble. I reached out and flipped it over. It was a message from my wealth management attorney. The text read, "Term sheet finalized and signed. Lumiere Group acquisition is complete. The $18 million payout will clear into your private account next week. Congratulations, Vanessa." I stared at the glowing screen. $18 million. And Bradley, in his arrogant rush to cut me off, had just legally signed away his right to half a fortune. I locked my phone, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "Separate finances it is, Bradley. Let the games begin." I listened to the hum of the garage door opening and closing as Bradley backed his sedan out of the driveway. Only when the sound of his engine faded completely down the street did I finally move. I walked over to the door connecting the kitchen to the garage and turned the handle. I stepped inside the space that Bradley so viciously mocked just moments ago. To him, this was just a dusty room where I played with essential oils. But he never actually looked closely. He never paid attention. If he had, he would have noticed the commercial-grade stainless steel prep tables lining the walls. He would have seen the heavy-duty climate control system I installed myself to keep the ambient temperature at exactly 68 degrees. He would have registered the pallets of sleek glass bottles waiting to be filled, labeled, and shipped to thousands of desperate customers. This was the beating heart of Botanica Pure. 4 years ago, I started this company with nothing but $1,000 from my personal savings and a relentless drive to create a truly clean organic skincare line. I spent months researching cosmetic chemistry, sourcing ethically harvested ingredients, and perfecting my formulas. Bradley had laughed at me the day I brought my first batch of night serum into the kitchen. He told me the market was too saturated and that I lacked the business acumen to compete with the big brands. He was entirely wrong. My regenerative night serum was a masterpiece. It took 3 years of slow, steady growth building a loyal local customer base before the explosion happened. 6 months ago, a major beauty influencer happened to purchase a bottle while visiting a boutique downtown. She posted a glowing review video praising how the serum cleared her stubborn breakouts and gave her skin an unbelievable youthful glow. That video amassed millions of views overnight. The viral surge was catastrophic in the best possible way. I woke up the next morning to thousands of orders. By noon, I was completely sold out. Over the next few months, Botanica Pure transformed from a successful small business into a global phenomenon. I was shipping to Europe, Asia, and across the Americas. I had to rent a separate off-site warehouse just to handle the overflow and hire a third-party logistics team to manage the massive fulfillment operation. Bradley never noticed because he was always at the office or on the golf course, completely absorbed in his own corporate ladder climbing. When freight trucks arrived at the end of our street to pick up massive shipments, I simply told him the neighbors were doing heavy renovations. He never cared enough to ask follow-up questions. I walked over to my desk in the corner of the garage and opened my laptop. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating the sleek interface of my secure email portal. There it was, the finalized acquisition term sheet from the Lumiere Group. They are a massive international cosmetics conglomerate known for snatching up viral independent brands and integrating them into their luxury portfolios. We had been in aggressive negotiations for 3 months. Their initial offer was $10 million, but I knew my worth. I knew my profit margins were immaculate, and my customer retention rate was unprecedented in the industry. I held my ground, and yesterday they finally capitulated. They agreed to purchase Botanica Pure for exactly $18 million. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for Harrison, my primary wealth management attorney. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the sharp professional tone of a man who managed high-net-worth clients for a living. "Vanessa," he greeted me warmly. "I received your message about the term sheet. The Lumiere board is thrilled with the final numbers. We are completely on track for the funds to be dispersed into your private holding account by next Wednesday. Everything is finalized. Harrison, I need you to confirm something for me," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I need to know the exact legal standing of a post-nuptial agreement if it is signed today before those corporate funds clear." There was a brief, heavy pause on the other end of the line. Harrison shifted from congratulatory advisor to cautious legal counsel in an instant. "A post-nuptial agreement," he asked. "Did Bradley ask you to sign one?" "He did not just ask," I replied. "He demanded it." He had a lawyer draft a highly aggressive document stating that all assets, debts, and incomes are 100% separate, effective immediately. He brought it to me this morning and I signed it without arguing. Harrison let out a sharp breath. "Vanessa, why would you sign a legal document without letting me review it first? That is incredibly risky behavior." "Because he is cutting me off, Harrison. He thinks I am a financial drain on him. He believes I make zero money, and he wanted to legally protect his corporate salary from me. He demanded 100% separation of finances." I read the clauses carefully. They explicitly sever all rights, titles, and interests in the separate property or future income of the other party. I need to know if it holds up in court. I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking rapidly on his end, as Harrison likely pulled up relevant state statutes. If the document was drafted by a competent attorney and both parties signed it willingly without duress, then yes, it is legally binding upon signature, he explained slowly. Because you signed it today, the financial separation is active right now. So I asked, my heart beating a steady, confident rhythm against my ribs. "When the $18 million from the Lumiere Group hits my account next week, what happens?" Harrison stopped typing. The realization hit him like a freight train. He let out a low whistle of absolute disbelief. "If the separation is active today and the payout clears next week, then those funds are classified entirely as your sole and separate property. Bradley has absolutely no legal claim to a single cent of that $18 million. By forcing you to sign that document to protect his own salary, he just effectively locked himself out of your entire fortune." A wide, triumphant smile broke across my face. I looked around my pristine, highly functional garage laboratory. The irony was so rich it was almost intoxicating. Bradley wanted to be entirely self-sufficient. He wanted to hoard his corporate bonuses and punish me for daring to dream outside the confines of his approval. In his arrogance, he had built his own perfect cage. "Are you absolutely positive, Harrison?" I asked, needing to hear it one more time. "I am positive," he replied, a hint of amusement breaking through his professional demeanor. "The timing is immaculate, Vanessa. If you had waited until after the payout cleared to sign that agreement, the funds would have been considered joint marital assets. He could have easily claimed half of everything you built. By forcing your hand this morning, he handed you total financial independence. You are entirely protected from him." "Thank you, Harrison. I will review the final Lumiere contracts this afternoon. Have a good day." I ended the call and leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair. The silence of the house wrapped around me, but it no longer felt oppressive or lonely. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting for me to paint my future. For years, I had tiptoed around Bradley and his fragile ego. I had endured his condescension, his snide remarks about my work ethic, and his constant reminders that he was the primary breadwinner. I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, hoping that one day he would see me as an equal partner. Now I realized that true partnerships cannot be forged with someone who views you as a burden. He did not want a wife. He wanted a subordinate he could control through financial dominance. But the control was gone. I was sitting on a multi-million-dollar empire, and he had legally waived his right to share any of it. My phone buzzed sharply against the desk, disrupting my thoughts. I picked it up, expecting another email from the Lumiere transition team regarding the corporate handover. Instead, it was a push notification from the Venmo app on my home screen. Bradley requested $42.50 from you. I stared at the screen, blinking in sheer disbelief. I tapped the notification and opened the application. There was the request sitting right at the top of my activity feed. The memo line was brief and entirely devoid of affection. It simply read, "Half the groceries from yesterday." A harsh laugh escaped my throat, echoing off the stainless steel tables in the empty garage. We had been separated financially for less than an hour, and he was already weaponizing it against me. He was nickel and diming me over groceries that we had bought for the household, including the expensive steak he insisted on buying for his own dinner while I ate a simple salad. $42.50. He probably spent more than that on a single round of drinks with his colleagues after work. He was trying to assert his dominance immediately, trying to make me feel the tight squeeze of losing his financial support. He wanted me to panic. He wanted me to realize how hard it was to survive without his corporate salary padding our joint checking account. I opened my personal banking application. My balance was modest, holding just enough operational cash to cover my day-to-day expenses, while I kept the heavy revenue flowing exclusively through my corporate business accounts. I had more than enough liquid cash to cover his petty request. I toggled back to the Venmo app and hit the pay button. I transferred the $42.50 instantly. I did not argue. I did not text him to complain about how unfair and ridiculous he was being. I simply added a cheerful, smiling emoji to the memo line and hit send. The transaction completed with a satisfying chime. I set the phone down and looked at my reflection in the dark, glossy screen of my laptop. Bradley thought he was initiating a war of financial attrition. He thought he was going to slowly starve me out, making me beg for every dollar just to keep the lights on in my garage. He was entirely unaware that he had just brought a tiny plastic knife to a nuclear fight. I would play his game for now. I would pay his petty invoices. I would split every utility bill down to the very last cent. I would let him believe he was winning this war of endurance, setting the stage perfectly for the ultimate revelation. The battlefield was clearly drawn, and I was completely ready. The next 72 hours were an absolute masterclass in petty financial warfare. Bradley returned home from work that Tuesday evening with a cheap brass padlock he had purchased from the local hardware store. I watched from the kitchen island as he proudly drilled a hasp into the custom mahogany wine cabinet in the dining room, securing his expensive vintage bottles behind cold, hard metal. He handed me a printed, itemized receipt for the padlock and asked for exactly $7.42 because the cabinet was considered a shared household fixture. I transferred the money instantly. By Thursday morning, the refrigerator had become an active battlefield. Bradley had taken a thick black marker and drawn a literal line down the center of the top shelf. His artisan cheeses and imported cold cuts sat on the right. My simple salad greens were shoved aggressively to the left. Taped to the stainless steel door was a freshly printed spreadsheet detailing the monthly utility bills split exactly down to the final decimal point. Water, gas, electricity, and trash collection were all divided with ruthless precision. But his crowning achievement came on Friday evening. He walked into the living room and dropped a formal lease agreement right on my lap. Since my name is the only one on the primary deed, he announced, crossing his arms, "You will now be paying me fair market rent for occupying half of this property. That comes out to $1,800 a month due on the 1st. I stared at the lease agreement. It was incredibly insulting considering I had contributed my entire savings to the original down payment 4 years ago. But I did not argue. I simply opened my mobile banking application and transferred the exact rental amount from my modest personal checking account directly into his primary account. I played the part of the struggling, panicked wife perfectly. I sighed heavily, rubbed my temples, and muttered about needing to take on extra freelance design work just to make ends meet. Bradley practically glowed with deep satisfaction. He thought he was watching me slowly drown. He had absolutely no idea that my $18 million payout had officially cleared that very morning, resting safely in a high-yield private wealth account he could never touch. The true test of my patience arrived on Sunday. Bradley had insisted we maintain our traditional Sunday dinner with his family at a high-end downtown steakhouse. He claimed that canceling would raise too many questions, and he wanted to keep our new financial arrangement strictly between us for now. I knew exactly what that meant. He wanted to maintain his image as the perfect providing husband to the outside world while suffocating me behind closed doors. When we arrived at the restaurant, Bradley strode ahead of me, greeting the hostess and requesting his usual corner booth. His mother, Patricia, and his sister, Monica, were already seated waiting for us. Patricia wore her signature pearls and a look of perpetual disapproval that deepened the moment her eyes landed on me. Monica immediately began inspecting my simple black dress, looking for a designer label she could not find. Bradley kissed his mother's cheek and ordered a $200 bottle of Cabernet without consulting anyone. I ordered a simple sparkling water. The dynamic was suffocatingly familiar, but tonight the air crackled with a new specific tension. Bradley had clearly broken his own rule about keeping our financial separation a secret. I could see it in the triumphant gleam in Patricia's eyes and the cruel smirk playing on Monica's carefully painted lips. They knew everything. The appetizers barely hit the table before Patricia launched her carefully orchestrated attack. She sliced into her crab cake with surgical precision and looked directly at me. Bradley tells me you two have implemented some necessary financial boundaries, Patricia said, her voice carrying easily over the ambient noise of the upscale dining room. I must say, Vanessa, it is about time. You cannot expect my son to carry you forever. I took a slow sip of my water. Bradley stared at his phone, pretending to answer an urgent work email, completely removing himself from the crossfire he had intentionally set up. Is that what he told you? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Monica chimed in, leaning across the crisp white tablecloth. He told us you finally signed a post-nuptial agreement protecting his assets. Honestly, Vanessa, we were starting to wonder how long you were going to drag him down. You have been playing around in that garage for 4 years. It is completely embarrassing. Bradley is a corporate director, and his wife sells homemade lotion at farmers markets. Patricia set her fork down, shaking her head in theatrical disappointment. You forced him to do this, Vanessa. A man works hard to build a successful life, and he expects a true partner, not a dependent. You have acted like an absolute leech, draining his resources while contributing nothing to the household. The sheer hypocrisy of her statement was staggering. For 4 years, I had cooked every holiday meal, hosted every birthday party, and managed every aspect of their son's domestic life, so he could focus entirely on climbing the corporate ladder. I had supported him emotionally and physically while building my own empire in the shadows. But to Patricia and Monica, my lack of a corporate title meant I was inherently worthless. They saw me as a charity case Bradley had taken pity on. You know, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with venom, I always told Bradley he should have married someone in his own tax bracket. Someone who actually understands the value of a hard-earned dollar. Now he has to legally protect himself from his own wife just to secure his financial future. It is a tragedy, really. I looked at Bradley. He was swirling the expensive red wine in his crystal glass, a faint, cruel smile touching his lips. He was thoroughly enjoying watching his mother and sister tear me apart. He thought this public humiliation would finally break my spirit, forcing me to submit entirely to his financial control. He wanted me to feel isolated, unsupported, and completely dependent on his mercy. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice or cause a public scene. I let them air all their bitter grievances, letting their cruel words wash right over me. Every insult they hurled was just another confirmation that I was doing exactly the right thing by leaving him behind. The dinner dragged on for 2 excruciating hours. Patricia and Monica ordered the most expensive cuts of dry-aged beef on the menu. Bradley ordered a second bottle of wine and a chilled seafood tower. I ate a house salad and watched them feast. When the plates were cleared, the waiter placed a black leather folio in the center of the table. The total came to exactly $840. Bradley leaned back against the booth, crossed his arms, and looked directly at me. His smirk was arrogant. "Separate finances, remember," he said loudly. "You pay for what you consume. I am not covering your share." Patricia and Monica exchanged delighted glances. "Well, I certainly am not paying for your portion, Vanessa," Patricia declared. Monica laughed. "Looks like you better start washing dishes in the back, Vanessa. That little garage business is not going to cover an $800 bill." They sat there waiting for me to panic. They waited for me to beg Bradley to cover the cost or humiliate myself by asking to split the bill in front of the restaurant. I did none of those things. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a solid metal card. It was sleek, matte black, and heavy in my hand. It was the exclusive private wealth card my attorney Harrison had overnighted to me, linked directly to my new $18 million holding account. I slipped the black card into the leather folio covering it with the receipt so the luxury branding was hidden. I signaled the waiter, who stepped over immediately. I handed him the folio. "Please put the entire table on this card," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, terrifying authority. "And please add a 20% gratuity." The waiter nodded and walked away. Bradley frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering as confusion washed over his features. "How are you paying for this?" he demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "Your checking account barely has enough to cover rent." I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my black dress. I looked down at the three of them. Bradley looked genuinely confused and slightly panicked. Patricia and Monica looked completely baffled by my sudden ability to cover their massive tab without blinking an eye. "I am leaving now," I said, ignoring his question. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." "Bradley, do not wait up for me." I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the cool night air, feeling more liberated than I had in years. As I drove away, I imagined the silence that must have fallen over their table when the waiter returned the receipt. They were entirely in the dark, and the game had only just begun. The morning after the restaurant incident, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Bradley returned home late last night, slamming the door and stomping upstairs. When I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, he was already dressed in his tailored suit, gripping a ceramic mug. "How did you pay for that dinner, Vanessa?" he demanded, his voice hard. I smiled, pouring my coffee. "I told you, Bradley, I took on some freelance design work and saved up cash. I wanted to treat your family since you were concerned about separate finances." He scoffed, clearly not believing a word of it, but unable to prove otherwise. "Do not think you can buy your way back into my good graces with one meal. The post-nuptial agreement stands. We are financially separated. Pay your rent on the first, or I will start the eviction process." He marched out to the garage, and the heavy door clicked shut behind him. I took a slow sip of my coffee. He was incredibly arrogant. Around noon, the postal carrier dropped a thick stack of mail through the front door slot. I gathered the envelopes, sorting through the usual junk mail and utility bills that Bradley now insisted we split to the penny. Near the bottom of the stack, a thick, pristine white envelope caught my attention. It was addressed to Bradley, but the return address made me pause. It was from a premier luxury mortgage lending firm based in downtown Chicago. We already owned our suburban home, and our current mortgage was held by a different local bank. There was no logical reason for Bradley to receive correspondence from a high-end luxury lender. I stared at the envelope. Under normal circumstances, I would have respected his privacy and left it on his desk. But normal circumstances ended the moment he tried to financially ruin me. I held the envelope up to the light, trying to read the contents through the thick paper, but the security tinting blocked my view. I walked over to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a thin paring knife, and carefully slid it under the seal. The flap popped open cleanly. I pulled out a heavy embossed letter and began reading. My breath caught in my throat. It was a formal pre-approval letter for a luxury residential mortgage. The approved loan amount was a staggering $2.5 million. Bradley was attempting to secure a massive loan for a property located in the heart of the city. The letter referenced a specific address situated in one of the most exclusive high-rise buildings downtown. Why would Bradley need a $2.5 million penthouse? He had forced me to sign a post-nuptial agreement claiming my business was a financial drain. It made absolutely zero sense. Unless the financial drain he was worried about was not me at all. I walked into his home office sitting down at his pristine oak desk. Bradley often left his personal tablet in the bottom drawer, secured only by a simple 4-digit passcode. I typed in his birth year, and the screen unlocked instantly. I opened his web browser and checked his search history. For the past 2 months, he had been obsessively searching for luxury downtown real estate, high-end furniture stores, and expensive jewelry boutiques. I opened his personal banking application on the tablet, holding my breath. The account balances told a horrifying story. Bradley had completely drained his liquid savings. He had taken out massive personal loans from high-interest online lenders. His credit cards were nearly maxed out with charges from 5-star hotels, upscale boutiques, and expensive romantic weekend getaways. The narrative he had sold his mother and sister about me dragging him down was a complete lie. Bradley was drowning in debt entirely of his own making. I needed to see exactly what he was buying. I grabbed my car keys and walked out to the garage. I drove into the city, navigating the midday traffic with singular focus. The address led me to a towering structure of glass and steel piercing the downtown skyline. The building featured a private valet, a marble lobby, and a strict security desk. I parked my car across the street in a public garage and walked over to a small coffee shop with a clear view of the grand entrance. I ordered a green tea and sat at a window seat waiting. I did not have to wait long. Within an hour, Bradley's sleek black sedan pulled up to the valet stand. My heart pounded a steady rhythm against my ribs as I watched him step out of the vehicle. He was not alone. The passenger door opened and a young woman stepped onto the pavement. She was stunning with long blonde hair, a designer trench coat, and a confident strut. I recognized her immediately from the company holiday party last year. Her name was Amber. She was a 26-year-old junior sales associate at his firm. Bradley placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the glass doors of the luxury high-rise with practiced ease. They were laughing and leaning into each other, projecting the image of a wealthy, successful power couple. I watched them walk through the opulent lobby and disappear into the private elevators. The pieces of the puzzle fell together with terrifying clarity. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the aggressive complaints about my lack of income. It was all a carefully constructed smokescreen to hide Amber. Bradley was not buying a $2.5 million penthouse as an investment. He was buying it to house his mistress. He was funding a secret double life, trying to play the role of a wealthy corporate sugar daddy for a young woman who expected nothing but the best. Amber clearly believed Bradley was a wealthy executive with limitless resources. Bradley was desperately trying to keep up that illusion, even if it meant bankrupting himself in the process. I sat in the coffee shop staring at my cooling tea as the sheer brilliance of my current situation washed over me. Bradley had forced me to sign that post-nuptial agreement because he wanted to protect his corporate salary from me. He wanted to ensure that when he eventually filed for divorce to be with Amber, I would not be entitled to half of his savings or his retirement accounts. He thought he was locking me out of his wealth. But in his desperate scramble to hide his affair and protect his money, he had made a fatal miscalculation. The post-nuptial agreement clearly stated that all assets, debts, and incomes are 100% separate. Debts. That was the crucial word. Bradley had taken out hundreds of thousands of dollars in high-interest personal loans to fund his luxury dates and impress Amber. He was currently attempting to take on a $2.5 million mortgage for a penthouse he could not actually afford. Before he forced me to sign that document, those debts would have been considered joint marital liabilities. If we divorced, I could have been held responsible for half of the massive financial crater he was currently digging for himself. By demanding a total separation of finances to protect his salary from my lotion hobby, Bradley had legally isolated all of his toxic debt solely to himself. He had built a financial bomb and locked himself in the room with it. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the realization settle. Bradley assumed his corporate ladder ascent would cover the massive debts he was accumulating. He believed his upcoming promotion would provide the cash flow needed to maintain Amber's expensive lifestyle and pay off the high-interest loans. He was banking his entire future on a corporate promotion that had not even happened yet. Meanwhile, my $18 million payout from the Lumiere Group was safely secured in an untraceable holding account. Bradley had no claim to my fortune, and I had no liability for his ruin. He had handed me the perfect weapon to destroy him. I watched his car pull away into the city traffic, feeling no sadness or betrayal. I only felt a cold, calculating anticipation. Bradley wanted to humiliate me, isolate me, and cast me aside for a younger model, while protecting his corporate assets. I walked back to my car with a new purpose. Bradley wanted Amber to have the luxury penthouse on the top floor of that beautiful building. It was time for me to make my first major move. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harrison, my wealth management attorney. The game board was set, and it was time to squeeze the life out of Bradley's secret little world. Harrison answered almost immediately. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I gave him the exact address of the downtown high-rise building and the specific penthouse unit number I had seen on Bradley's pre-approval letter. I told Harrison I needed to know everything about the ownership structure of that property, and I needed to know it by the end of the business day. Harrison was a professional who thrived on complex, aggressive financial maneuvers. He simply asked for 24 hours and hung up. The very next morning, the $18 million from the Lumiere Group officially cleared into my private wealth account. I sat at my kitchen island staring at the astonishing string of zeros on my banking application. It was a staggering amount of money representing 4 years of sweat sacrifice and silent resilience. It was the ultimate shield. Bradley was out playing golf with his executives, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife had just become a multi-millionaire. Harrison called me exactly at noon. He had moved with lethal efficiency. The high-rise building was a newer development, and the top floor, which included the luxury penthouse Bradley was trying to secure, was currently owned by a private real estate developer. According to Harrison's corporate contacts, the developer was over-leveraged on a failing commercial project in another state and was actively seeking a quiet, rapid buyout to liquidate his residential assets. The penthouse was technically listed for lease to generate temporary cash flow, but the owner was desperate for a permanent cash buyer. I did not hesitate. I instructed Harrison to form a blind trust and an anonymous holding company immediately. We named it Nova Sterling Holdings. I wanted my identity completely shielded behind impenetrable layers of corporate legalese, ensuring Bradley could never trace the acquisition back to me. Once the holding company was established, I authorized Harrison to make a full cash offer for the entire top floor of the high-rise, including the exact penthouse Bradley was trying to lease for his 26-year-old mistress. Because we were offering pure cash with zero financing contingencies, the developer accepted the buyout within 3 hours. By the end of the week, the accelerated closing process was finalized. I was officially the owner of the luxury penthouse. I essentially became Bradley's prospective landlord. I scheduled a secure video meeting with the property management firm that handled the day-to-day operations for the high-rise. They were incredibly eager to please their wealthy new corporate owner. The property manager, a sharp woman named Sarah, walked me through the current status of the penthouse. She mentioned that they had a highly interested prospective tenant who had submitted a leasing application earlier that week. The applicant, she noted, had a rather arrogant demeanor and had initially provided a mortgage pre-approval letter, but was currently attempting to pivot to a high-end lease because he lacked the actual liquid cash for a down payment. I asked for the name of the applicant, knowing exactly what she would say. She confirmed it was Bradley. I smiled at the screen, keeping my voice perfectly professional. I informed the property manager that Nova Sterling Holdings had instituted a new strict zero-tolerance policy regarding financial risk for all our luxury properties. I instructed her to run a ruthless comprehensive audit on Bradley's financial application. I told her to scrutinize his debt-to-income ratio, his outstanding personal loans, and his recent credit inquiries. I knew exactly what they would find because I had seen his banking tablet. Bradley was buried in high-interest toxic debt. 2 hours later, the property manager emailed me the results of the financial audit. Bradley's debt-to-income ratio was catastrophic. His corporate salary was high, but his reckless spending on luxury hotels, fine dining, and secret getaways for Amber had completely eroded his financial stability. Furthermore, his recent flurry of loan applications had tanked his credit score. From a strict real estate perspective, he was a massive liability. Deny the application, I typed in my response to the property manager. Reject him immediately. Cite his unacceptable debt-to-income ratio and his excessive unsecured liabilities. Inform him that the new management considers him an extreme financial risk and that he is explicitly barred from leasing any premium units in this building. Do not leave room for negotiation. I hit send and closed my laptop. A deep, profound satisfaction settled over me. I walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on the stove, preparing a cup of chamomile tea. I arranged my mug on the marble counter, the very same counter where Bradley had slammed down his petty spreadsheets just days ago, demanding a total separation of finances. I did not have to wait long for the fallout. At exactly 6 o'clock, the heavy garage door slammed open. Bradley stormed into the house, his face flushed dark red with absolute fury. His tie was loosened, and his expensive suit jacket was slung carelessly over his shoulder. He did not even notice me sitting quietly at the kitchen island. He was gripping his cell phone to his ear, yelling so loudly that his voice echoed off the high ceilings. "What do you mean, new management?" He screamed into the phone, pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor. "I submitted my application a week ago. My income is deep into the six figures. I am a corporate director. You cannot deny me based on a temporary debt ratio." I took a slow, delicate sip of my tea, letting the warm liquid soothe my throat. I watched him unravel. "I have a flawless corporate record," Bradley yelled, his free hand gesturing wildly in the air. "Those personal loans are temporary liquid capital for business expenses. You are making a massive mistake. I demand to speak to the owner of the holding company. Put someone from Nova Sterling on the phone right now." He was demanding to speak to me. The irony was so exquisite I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. "I am not a financial risk," he roared, his face twisting in panic. "Do you know who I am? I am about to be promoted to regional vice president. I can buy and sell your entire management team. Listen to me very carefully. If you do not approve this lease, I will ruin your reputation in this city." The person on the other end of the line clearly hung up on him. Bradley pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the dark screen in utter disbelief. He let out a primal yell of frustration and hurled his phone onto the plush living room sofa. He dragged both hands down his face, breathing heavily, completely consumed by his own spectacular failure. He had promised Amber a $2.5 million penthouse in the sky. He had sold her the illusion of boundless wealth and corporate dominance. Now he had to go back to his demanding 26-year-old mistress and explain that he had been rejected for a lease because he was drowning in toxic debt. The carefully constructed facade of his secret double life was beginning to crack, and he was absolutely terrified. I set my teacup down on its matching saucer, making a soft, clinking sound. Bradley whipped his head around, finally registering my presence in the kitchen. He glared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with unspent adrenaline. "Bad day at the office, Bradley?" I asked, my voice dripping with mild, polite concern. He sneered at me, his arrogance returning in a desperate attempt to mask his humiliation. "You would not understand, Vanessa. It is complex corporate real estate nonsense. Incompetent middle management trying to flex their pathetic little muscles against successful people. I am dealing with individuals who have absolutely no vision." I nodded thoughtfully, picking up my tea again. It sounds terribly stressful. I am so glad we signed that post-nuptial agreement. With our finances completely separate, I do not have to worry about any of your complex real estate issues impacting my modest little life. It really is a weight off my shoulders. Bradley's eyes narrowed. He hated when I threw his own words back at him, but he was too distracted by his current crisis to engage in a proper fight. He scoffed, snatching his briefcase off the floor. Just make sure you have your rent money ready on the first, Vanessa. I do not have the patience to carry your dead weight this month. He turned and stomped up the stairs to the master bedroom, slamming the door violently behind him. I sat in the quiet kitchen, enjoying the absolute perfection of the moment. He thought he was the apex predator of our household. He thought he was untouchable. He had no idea that the incompetent middle management he was screaming at was acting on the direct orders of the woman sitting right in his kitchen. The pressure was mounting on him. Amber would not be happy about losing the penthouse. She would demand an alternative. She would want proof that he was the wealthy provider he claimed to be. Bradley would be forced to scramble, forced to dig himself even deeper into the financial grave he had dug for himself. He would try to compensate for this humiliating rejection by spending money he simply did not have. And I would be watching his every single move, ready to tighten the noose the very second he tried to breathe. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup in the sink, and walked calmly back to my garage laboratory. The financial separation he had demanded was working flawlessly. The $18 million payout was mine. The luxury penthouse was mine. The absolute control over his secret life was mine. Bradley had built a house of cards and I was holding the match. The garage laboratory felt like a quiet war room as I orchestrated my next move. I spent the following few days carefully observing Bradley navigate his crumbling reality. His usual arrogant swagger had completely evaporated, replaced by a frantic and desperate nervous energy that radiated from him the moment he walked through the front door. He was constantly glued to his cellular phone, pacing the perimeter of our suburban backyard, speaking in hushed, panicked tones. One evening I stood near the open kitchen window, hidden by the shadows, and listened intently to his frantic side of a highly contentious conversation. He was quite literally begging Amber for her patience. He promised his young mistress that he just needed a few more days to clear up a minor bureaucratic misunderstanding with the luxury property management firm. He confidently assured her that the downtown penthouse would absolutely be theirs, and they would be sipping expensive champagne on their private balcony by the weekend. I could hear the sheer absolute panic rising in his voice when she clearly threatened to walk away from their relationship. Amber was a woman who demanded immediate gratification, and Bradley was spectacularly failing to deliver the luxury lifestyle he had so arrogantly promised her. The immense pressure was actively breaking his spirit. To successfully bypass the rigid income requirements firmly established by my anonymous holding company, he desperately needed to show massive amounts of unencumbered liquid cash. I quietly monitored his incoming physical mail and intercepted a detailed monthly statement from his primary brokerage account. The documentation revealed that he had fully liquidated his minor stock portfolio, taking a massive financial penalty for the early withdrawal just to get his hands on the cash. But even that drastic measure was not nearly enough to satisfy the strict financial thresholds I had explicitly instructed the property manager to aggressively enforce. Driven by blind panic, he turned to the darkest corners of the financial sector. He actively applied for multiple predatory high-interest personal loans that carried astronomical annual percentage rates. He was recklessly mortgaging his entire financial future, selling his corporate soul to keep a 26-year-old woman impressed with his fabricated wealth. He truly and deeply believed that if he could just secure the keys to that specific penthouse, his highly anticipated incoming corporate promotion would magically fix the massive financial crater he was rapidly digging for himself. It was a spectacular display of absolute desperation, and I thoroughly relished watching every single second of his downward spiral. I scheduled another highly secure encrypted video call with Sarah, the professional property manager handling the high-rise building. I explicitly instructed her to continue stringing Bradley along to keep him dangling on the hook of false hope. I told her to send him an official email stating that the executive board of Nova Sterling Holdings was tentatively willing to reconsider his leasing application through a highly exclusive corporate appeals process. However, this specialized process required an unprecedented level of absolute financial transparency. Sarah was a true seasoned professional who understood exactly how to handle demanding applicants. She sent Bradley a formal legal request demanding absurd and intrusive amounts of personal documentation. We asked for 12 consecutive months of comprehensive bank statements from every single financial account he possessed. We demanded 3 full years of certified tax returns, proof of completely unencumbered liquid assets, a detailed written explanation for every single recent hard inquiry on his credit report, and formal letters of financial character reference from certified accountants. Normally, a highly successful corporate director would loudly scoff at such deeply invasive demands and simply find another luxury building to house his mistress. But Bradley was completely trapped by his own ego. He had already explicitly promised Amber that specific luxury penthouse with that specific panoramic city view. He had enthusiastically sold her the dream of living at that exact prestigious address. If he backed down now and tried to pivot to a lesser building, he would look like an absolute failure in her demanding eyes. So he swallowed his immense pride and completely complied with our outrageous demands. He spent an entire beautiful weekend locked away in his dark home office, frantically scanning and emailing hundreds of pages of highly sensitive personal financial data directly to my property management firm. When Sarah securely forwarded the massive digital package to my encrypted inbox, I poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water and spent several quiet hours reviewing his desperate submission. It was an absolute, undisputed goldmine of leverage. He had essentially handed me a signed, documented confession of his complete financial ruin. His monthly bank statements showcased the horrific reality of his daily reckless spending habits. The documents revealed thousands of dollars spent at luxury designer boutiques, exorbitant weekend hotel bills, and predatory loan deposits hitting his primary account, only to be immediately drained out to pay off severely maxed-out credit cards. His written explanations for the recent flurry of credit inquiries were completely laughable, falsely claiming they were for strategic real estate investment capital rather than desperate attempts to secure high-interest survival loans. He was aggressively bleeding out on paper, fully exposing the sheer, devastating depth of his toxic debt. I carefully compiled every single document into a secure, encrypted external hard drive. He had willingly handed me all the financial ammunition I would ever possibly need for a future divorce proceeding. I had seen more than enough. The psychological cat-and-mouse game had served its intended purpose perfectly. I sent a brief, decisive email to Sarah officially authorizing the final devastating blow. I explicitly instructed her to officially and permanently reject his leasing application. I told her to formally inform him that the holding company found his overall financial profile to be highly volatile, extremely risky, and entirely unacceptable for a luxury tenancy within our prestigious building. Furthermore, she was strictly ordered to state that he was officially and permanently blacklisted from all residential properties managed by their corporate firm. The rejection was to be absolute, final, and completely non-negotiable under any circumstances. The inevitable explosion happened that very same evening. I was sitting comfortably in the living room reading a classic novel when the heavy front door slammed open with terrifying aggressive force. Bradley stormed into the house, his face contorted in absolute red-faced rage. He violently threw his expensive leather briefcase across the room where it crashed loudly against the hallway wall, scattering confidential corporate papers everywhere. He marched aggressively over to me, his fists tightly clenched at his sides, breathing heavily and erratically like a cornered wild animal. He had clearly received the final rejection email from Sarah, and the crushing realization that he had lost the luxury penthouse forever had finally broken his fragile, arrogant mind. "This is all your fault!" he screamed, his voice shaking with furious, blinding indignation. "You did this to me, Vanessa. You completely ruined my financial standing. I carefully placed a small bookmark in my novel and looked up at him, feigning total innocent confusion. I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about, Bradley. I said, my tone remaining perfectly calm and measured. We have completely separate finances. We signed a legal document ensuring that fact. How could my actions possibly impact your pristine corporate financial standing? He leaned aggressively over me, his face just inches from mine, his breath smelling faintly of cheap office coffee and pure panic. Because you are a massive dead weight, he roared, spitting the words at me. For 4 consecutive years, I have carried the entire financial burden of this miserable household. I paid the expensive mortgage. I paid the utility bills. I funded your pathetic little garage hobby because you contribute absolutely nothing. Because I had to constantly support your freeloading lifestyle, my debt-to-income ratio became completely skewed. My flawless credit score took a massive hit because I was the only one bringing any real money into this stagnant marriage. I just lost out on a massive, highly lucrative real estate investment opportunity because the management company said I am severely overleveraged. And it is all because I have been dragging you along like a heavy, useless anchor. He was forcefully projecting his own spectacular failures onto me with staggering, breathtaking audacity. He was actually blaming my supposed lack of financial contribution for the massive high-interest personal loans he willfully took out to buy expensive designer gifts for his 26-year-old mistress. He genuinely and deeply believed his own twisted, fabricated narrative. He had completely convinced himself that his impending financial ruin was the direct result of my simple, quiet existence rather than the consequence of his own deceitful, expensive double life. I looked him directly in his wild, angry eyes. I deliberately kept my posture completely relaxed and my voice incredibly soft and soothing. I am so deeply sorry, Bradley, I said, offering him a look of profound sympathetic concern. I had absolutely no idea my presence in this house was causing you such profound, debilitating financial distress. It is a very good thing you bravely forced me to sign that restrictive post-nuptial agreement last week. Now my terrible financial habits can no longer damage your pristine corporate reputation. You are completely legally protected from my financial burden now. He let out a loud, guttural sound of pure primal frustration, aggressively running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, completely destroying the polished corporate image he worked so tirelessly to maintain. It is too late for that, he spat, turning abruptly away from me and pacing the length of the living room floor. The severe damage is already done. You ruined my chances at securing that crucial property. Now I have to desperately scramble to find another suitable investment before the absolute end of the month. You are completely useless, Vanessa. Entirely useless to me. He stormed off toward the kitchen to pour himself a massive glass of expensive scotch, leaving me entirely alone in the quiet living room. I calmly picked up my novel and opened it right back to my bookmarked page. A calm, genuine, triumphant smile slowly spread across my face. He was violently drowning in a turbulent sea of his own toxic, unmanageable debt, aggressively blaming the very woman who secretly held the absolute keys to his entire kingdom. I legally owned the luxury penthouse. I securely held his complete financial confession. I possessed $18 million in protected liquid cash, and he foolishly thought I was the one who was useless. Bradley actively avoided me, retreating to his office after work. He was plotting his next move, desperately trying to salvage his crumbling image in the eyes of his demanding mistress. By Thursday morning, his demeanor had violently shifted from panicked rage to a manufactured, arrogant calm. I watched from the kitchen as he carried a sleek duffel bag down the stairs, setting it by the front door. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit and offered me a dismissive glance. "I am flying out to Denver this evening," he announced, his tone dripping with practiced corporate importance. "The firm is hosting a mandatory executive leadership conference all weekend. Given my impending promotion to regional vice president, my attendance is absolutely critical. Do not expect me to answer my phone. My schedule will be packed with high-level networking events and board meetings." I smiled, pouring my morning coffee. Of course, Bradley, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. I hope the Denver weather is agreeable for your important meetings. Have a productive and successful trip. He scoffed, snatching his keys from the table. Just make sure the house is actually clean when I get back, Vanessa. He walked out the door confidently, believing his elaborate deception had worked flawlessly. The moment his car turned the corner, I set my coffee down and picked up my phone. Bradley was a creature of incredibly predictable habit, and his lies were always structurally flawed. I opened my contacts and dialed the number for Chloe, the wife of another sales director at Bradley's firm. We had maintained a polite friendship over the years, bonding over our shared endurance of tedious company holiday parties. Chloe picked up after the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. I exchanged brief pleasantries before casually mentioning that Bradley was packing for the Denver Leadership Conference and asking if her husband was also attending. Chloe let out a genuine confused laugh. A leadership conference in Denver, she asked? Vanessa. There is no corporate conference this weekend. The entire regional executive team is staying local to finalize quarterly review documents. My husband is working from home all weekend. Chloe sighed, a sound of quiet, knowing sympathy. Vanessa. I saw the travel itinerary on my husband's desk yesterday. Bradley formally requested 3 days of paid personal time off. He booked a luxury ski suite at a 5-star resort in Aspen. He explicitly requested 2 sets of VIP ski passes and a couple's spa package. I thanked Chloe for her honesty and ended the call. A cold, calculated smile spread across my face. Bradley was not attending a corporate summit to secure his promotion. He was frantically fleeing to the snowy mountains of Aspen, taking Amber on a lavish apology vacation to aggressively compensate for failing to secure her dream penthouse. He was doubling down on his catastrophic financial mistakes, desperately trying to buy her continued affection with money he simply did not possess. I spent the next 48 hours enjoying the profound, peaceful silence of my home. I focused entirely on my own flourishing empire, reviewing marketing strategies for Botanica Pure and finalizing the integration timelines with the Lumiere Group transition team. I felt absolutely no jealousy or heartbreak regarding his romantic getaway. Bradley and his mistress were existing in a completely fabricated reality, a fragile glass house built entirely on predatory loans, an impending corporate disaster. Saturday evening arrived, bringing a quiet, comfortable stillness to the suburban neighborhood. I was sitting on the plush living room sofa, reviewing my newly diversified investment portfolios, when my personal cell phone illuminated with a bright, urgent flash. A high-priority notification pushed through from my banking application. I tapped the screen and opened the alert. It was a fraud prevention warning requesting immediate verification for a massive pending transaction. I stared at the screen, analyzing the highly detailed merchant data. The charge was for exactly $4,280 at the Alpine Reserve, a notoriously exclusive VIP restaurant located in the heart of downtown Aspen. The transaction was attempting to process through an old joint credit card account. It was a high-limit platinum card we had opened together 3 years ago for emergency household repairs. When Bradley had furiously demanded our total financial separation and forced me to sign that restrictive post-nuptial agreement, he had arrogantly instructed his aggressive lawyer to sever all our primary checking and savings accounts. But in his blind, desperate rush to cut me off and hide his assets, he had completely forgotten to remove my name as a primary authorized user on this specific legacy credit account. I still retained total legal administrative access. Bradley was currently sitting in a wildly expensive Aspen restaurant, aggressively trying to impress Amber and likely a table full of her shallow, demanding friends. He was attempting to casually drop $4,000 on vintage champagne and imported truffles to prove he was the wealthy corporate titan she desired. He reached into his designer wallet and confidently handed the server the one card he mistakenly believed was safe from his heavily maxed-out personal debt limitations. He had no idea that the digital authorization request had routed directly to the palm of my hand. I did not hesitate for a single second. I logged into the primary banking portal using my secured administrative credentials. I navigated directly to the card management dashboard. The interface presented me with a series of distinct security options. I bypassed the simple temporary freeze feature and selected the most severe permanent action available. I clicked the button to report the physical card as stolen and compromised. The system prompted a final warning stating that this action would immediately and permanently decline all pending transactions and immediately lock the entire line of credit, preventing any further usage until a new physical card was issued and verified. I pressed confirm with absolute resolute certainty. The screen refreshed, displaying a bright red banner indicating the card was now officially dead. I set my phone down on the coffee table, pouring myself a fresh glass of sparkling water. The chronological sequence of his impending public humiliation played out vividly in my mind. Right at this very moment, a distinguished server in a crisp white uniform was returning to Bradley's table, holding a sleek leather folio. The server was bending down discreetly, whispering the absolute most devastating words a man desperately pretending to be a millionaire could possibly hear. "Your card has been declined, sir." I could vividly picture Bradley's initial arrogant dismissal, confident it was merely a simple bank error. I imagined him handing the server a different card, his backup personal credit line, only to watch the server return a second time with the exact same humiliating result because his personal accounts were already severely maxed out to their absolute limits. Exactly 4 minutes after I killed the credit card, my phone began to vibrate violently against the glass table. The caller identification displayed Bradley's name. I let it ring. It stopped and immediately started ringing again. He called 6 consecutive times in a span of 3 minutes, his sheer desperation vibrating through the digital signal. When he finally realized I was deliberately ignoring his calls, the frantic voicemails began to arrive. I opened the audio files and listened to his complete psychological unraveling. "Vanessa, pick up the phone," he hissed, his voice a strained, hushed whisper, clearly attempting to hide his panic from his dinner guests. "The joint platinum card is declining. You need to call the bank right now and authorize the transaction. They are holding my card, and the management is threatening to call the local authorities if I cannot cover this bill. Pick up the phone, Vanessa, this is an absolute emergency." The second voicemail arrived 2 minutes later, his hushed whisper replaced by raw, naked terror. "Vanessa, please. Amber's friends are staring at me. The manager is at our table. My personal accounts are locked. I need you to transfer funds immediately. I will pay you back. Just unlock the joint card. Do not do this to me." I casually deleted both audio messages without a single ounce of pity. I knew exactly what his next desperate move had to be. With his mistress watching his fake wealth evaporate in real time and a massive bill anchoring him to a restaurant he could not afford, he had only one pathetic option left. He had to call his highly critical mother. I pictured Patricia sitting comfortably receiving a frantic phone call from her beloved son, begging her to wire emergency cash to pay for a lavish dinner with another woman. He was forced to expose his complete financial failure to the mother who constantly praised his corporate dominance. He had to endure the emasculation of begging for an allowance while his mistress watched him crumble. I leaned back into the soft sofa cushions, feeling a profound sense of peace. The financial separation he desperately wanted was working flawlessly, and his empire of lies was burning to the ground. Bradley arrived home on Monday evening carrying the heavy, suffocating aura of a man who had just endured the ultimate humiliation. I was in the kitchen casually reviewing shipping manifests for Botanica Pure when the front door slammed open with enough force to rattle the picture frames in the hallway. He marched directly toward me, his face drawn tight, his eyes burning with a volatile mixture of embarrassment and unrestrained rage. The Aspen trip had clearly been an unmitigated disaster. He looked exhausted, defeated, and incredibly dangerous to his own well-being. Without a single word of greeting, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a crisp white legal document. He slammed it down on the marble island right over my paperwork. It was a formal 30-day eviction notice. I looked from the document up to his furious face, maintaining my perfectly neutral expression. "What is this, Bradley?" I asked, my voice steady and unbothered. "It is exactly what it looks like, Vanessa," he spat, leaning heavily against the counter. "You have 30 days to vacate this property. I am selling the house. I need to liquidate my assets immediately to finalize a massive commercial real estate acquisition that your little credit card stunt nearly ruined. You deliberately humiliated me in front of critical business associates this weekend, and I am entirely done playing house with a vindictive freeloading roommate." He was lying, of course. There was no commercial real estate acquisition. He needed to sell the house because he had to pay back his mother for bailing him out at the Aspen restaurant, and he desperately needed the cash equity to keep his mistress from abandoning him completely. I picked up the eviction notice and read it carefully. Since his name was the only one on the primary deed, he had the legal right to force a sale, especially after I had willingly signed the post-nuptial agreement severing our assets. He thought he was throwing me out onto the street. He thought I would break down, cry, and beg him to reconsider because my business operated out of the garage. "I understand," I said, setting the paper back down. "If you need to liquidate assets to survive, I will not stand in your way. I will begin packing my things." He blinked momentarily, thrown off balance by my immediate calm compliance. My serene acceptance frustrated him even more. "You better be out by the deadline," he warned, his voice shaking slightly. "Because I am bringing a professional appraiser by tomorrow afternoon to evaluate the property layout. I suggest you have the garage cleaned up. I do not want them seeing your messy little lotion hobby and thinking the house is zoned for industrial waste." He stormed upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen. I smiled, folding the eviction notice neatly in half. He wanted me out. He was practically handing me the perfect excuse to relocate my entire operation and my life into the luxury skyline he could only dream of. The following afternoon, I remained in the house, quietly organizing my personal belongings. The heavy lifting for Botanica Pure had already been scheduled. My logistics team was fully prepared to migrate the garage laboratory to a massive commercial facility I had leased earlier that morning, using my corporate funds. I was sitting at the dining room table answering emails when Bradley's sedan pulled into the driveway. I heard the lock turn and Bradley walked in wearing his best tailored suit, projecting an aura of absolute authority. Trailing behind him, carrying a clipboard and a digital measuring tape, was Amber. She looked exactly as she had outside the luxury high-rise, perfectly styled, radiating an entitled, arrogant energy. Bradley had actually brought his 26-year-old mistress into my home, disguising her as a real estate professional, simply to twist the knife. It was a spectacular display of absolute disrespect. "Vanessa," Bradley announced loudly, ensuring his voice carried through the open floor plan. "This is Amber. She is a premier real estate appraiser from a top firm downtown. She is here to take measurements and evaluate the property for the upcoming listing. I expect you to stay out of her way while she works." Amber stepped forward, offering me a condescending, sickly sweet smile. "It is so nice to finally meet you, Vanessa," she said, placing deliberate emphasis on my name. "Bradley has told me so much about the house. It has a lot of potential. It just needs a very thorough updating to get rid of the stale energy." I stood up, smoothing my skirt, and looked her directly in the eyes. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Amber. Please feel free to measure whatever you need. I am sure Bradley is very anxious to see how much equity he can pull from the walls." Bradley shot me a warning glare, but Amber merely giggled, clicking her pen. They began their theatrical tour of the house. I followed at a discreet distance, watching the absolute absurdity of their performance. Amber would point her digital laser at a wall, pretend to jot down notes, and then lean in close to Bradley, whispering and giggling. He puffed out his chest, soaking in her attention, desperately trying to rebuild the affluent persona that had shattered at the ski resort. Eventually, they made their way to the garage. Bradley opened the door with a dramatic sigh, ushering her into my pristine stainless steel workspace. Amber looked around, wrinkling her nose as if she had just stepped into a landfill. "Wow," she said, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet space. "This is certainly unique. Bradley told me you made little soaps out here, but this looks so dated and cheap. I mean, all this metal, it really destroys the residential value of the property. The new buyers will absolutely have to gut this entire room. It looks like a gloomy little dungeon. She turned to Bradley, resting her hand on his bicep. We will definitely need to factor the demolition costs into the appraisal value, Bradley. This little hobby room is going to hurt your listing price significantly. Bradley nodded solemnly, wrapping his hand over hers. I know. I tried to tell her to keep her mess contained, but she never listens. It is fine, Amber. I have the capital to cover the renovations before we list it. I stood by the doorway listening to them mock a business that had just sold for $18 million. Amber was standing in the exact room that had funded the very company acquiring their corporate employer. She was calling a multi-million-dollar incubation lab a cheap dungeon, all while clinging to a man who was quietly drowning in predatory debt. I stepped into the garage, my heels clicking sharply against the concrete floor. I think you are absolutely right, Amber, I said, maintaining a bright, cheerful tone. The space is completely dated. In fact, I do not think Bradley should have to deal with my mess for another 30 days. It is incredibly unfair to burden him with my presence while he is trying to liquidate his life. Bradley frowned, dropping his hand from Amber's waist, clearly confused by my agreeable attitude. What are you talking about, Vanessa? I turned to him, offering the most serene, peaceful smile I had ever mustered in my entire life. I am saying you do not need to wait 30 days, Bradley. I am leaving right now. I walked briskly past them, leaving them standing awkwardly in the garage, and went straight up the stairs to the master bedroom. I did not pack boxes. I did not gather photo albums or winter coats or kitchen appliances. I went into my closet and pulled out a single sleek designer overnight bag that I had purchased just yesterday. I packed a few essential items, my expensive skincare products, my laptop, my legal documents, and a silk robe. Everything else in this house was tainted by his presence, and I had enough liquid capital to replace it all 100 times over. I zipped the overnight bag shut, slipped my phone into my purse, and walked back downstairs. Bradley and Amber had moved into the foyer, watching me with expressions of sheer baffled disbelief. Bradley had expected a fight. He had brought his mistress here to humiliate me, to watch me beg to stay in my home, to assert his absolute control over my living situation. Instead, I was walking out without shedding a single tear, carrying nothing but a designer duffel bag. "Where do you think you are going?" Bradley demanded, stepping into my path, his confusion rapidly morphing into anger. "You cannot just leave. You have nowhere to go. You cannot afford a hotel on your meager little income." I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, looking at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated pity. "You told me to vacate the property, Bradley. I am simply complying with your legal demands. You want the house. You can keep the house. You can keep the mortgage, the utility bills, the property taxes, and the broken wine cabinet. It is all yours, 100% separate, just like you wanted." Amber crossed her arms, smirking from the hallway. "Let her go, Bradley. If she wants to sleep in her car, let her. She is just being dramatic because she knows she lost." I looked at Amber, offering her a slow, knowing smile that made her smirk falter slightly. "Good luck with the appraisal, Amber. I truly hope Bradley gets exactly what he deserves for this property. He is going to need every single penny." I stepped around Bradley, opening the heavy front oak door. The afternoon sun washed over the porch, bright and welcoming. Vanessa, Bradley yelled from the foyer, his voice echoing with desperate, confused authority. "If you walk out that door, you are never coming back. I will change the locks tonight. You are entirely on your own." I paused on the threshold, looking back at the man I had once thought was my partner. He was standing next to his mistress, chest puffed out, clinging desperately to an illusion of wealth and power that was already crumbling beneath his feet. He honestly believed he had won. He genuinely thought he had successfully discarded me and secured his glorious future. "I promise you, Bradley," I said, my voice soft but carrying a sharp, terrifying finality. "I have absolutely no intention of ever coming back." I turned and walked down the driveway toward my car. I did not look back. I placed my designer bag on the passenger seat, slid behind the steering wheel, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the suburban neighborhood, a profound sense of absolute liberation washed over me. Bradley thought he was sending me into homelessness and financial ruin. He was completely unaware that I was typing an address into my GPS navigation system. It was the address of the most exclusive luxury high-rise building in the downtown district. I was driving straight to my newly acquired multi-million-dollar penthouse, the exact same penthouse he had promised his mistress, where I would pour myself a glass of vintage champagne and watch his corporate empire burn to the ground from the highest balcony in the city. I parked my car in the secure underground garage of the luxury high-rise. The private elevator whisked me up to the top floor opening directly into my new sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the downtown skyline. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture featuring sleek marble floors, custom lighting, and an expansive private terrace that hovered above the bustling city streets. This was the exact property Bradley had desperately tried to secure for his mistress. Now it was my personal fortress, purchased in pure cash and entirely shielded behind my anonymous corporate holding company. I poured myself a glass of vintage champagne and watched the city lights flicker to life. Bradley was currently sitting in a dated suburban house with a furious 26-year-old mistress and a mountain of toxic debt. I was standing at the absolute pinnacle of the city. My peaceful weekend transition was quickly followed by an explosive Monday morning in the corporate world. I sat at my new custom glass desk in the penthouse office, logging into the highly secure Lumiere Group Executive Board portal. As the newest majority shareholder and a vital strategic advisor for their organic cosmetics division, I had unrestricted access to their high-level corporate maneuvers. A massive internal memo flashed across my screen. The Lumiere Group had officially finalized the hostile acquisition of a mid-level regional distribution firm. I smiled as I read the target company name. It was Bradley's exact corporate employer. Lumiere Group was a ruthless international conglomerate known for absorbing smaller supply chain companies to streamline their global shipping logistics. The acquisition was a standard aggressive corporate takeover. The internal memo clearly outlined the immediate restructuring strategy. The corporate overlords from Lumiere were going to thoroughly clean house. They planned to completely gut the redundant middle management, fire the bloated executive team, and promote only a select few top-performing directors who passed a rigorous internal audit. The atmosphere at Bradley's office was undoubtedly descending into absolute sheer panic. I picked up my phone and called Chloe. She answered on the first ring, her voice hushed and frantic. "Vanessa, the office is in a state of total chaos," she whispered clearly, hiding in a break room. "The buyout was announced an hour ago. Security is literally escorting the regional vice president out of the building right now. They fired him on the spot. Everyone is terrified about losing their jobs. Everyone except Bradley." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Tell me exactly what Bradley is doing, Chloe." "He is strutting around the sales floor like a peacock," she replied, a mix of disgust and disbelief in her tone. "He is openly bragging to anyone who will listen that this merger is his golden ticket. He actually told my husband that since the regional vice president was just eliminated, he is the absolute natural successor for the position. He is already talking about his new executive compensation package and how he plans to restructure the entire sales division once he takes over." The sheer magnitude of his delusion was staggering. Bradley was entirely oblivious to the monumental reality of his situation. He had spent 4 years aggressively mocking my business. He had degraded Botanica Pure at every possible opportunity, calling it a pathetic little garage hobby. Because he possessed such overwhelming arrogant disdain for my work, he had never once bothered to look at my corporate filings, my trademark registrations, or my financial documents. He had absolutely no idea that Lumiere Group was the exact same conglomerate that had just purchased my brand for $18 million. He was blindly celebrating a corporate takeover orchestrated by a board of directors where I currently held a highly influential seat. He genuinely believed this merger was his ultimate salvation. He thought the impending promotion would magically erase the catastrophic financial crater he had dug for himself. He saw the title of regional vice president as the perfect solution to all his self-inflicted problems. It would provide the massive cash flow he desperately needed to appease his demanding mistress and pay off the predatory personal loans he had taken out to fund his secret double life. But Bradley was gravely miscalculating his standing with Amber. His mistress was not a woman known for her patience or her understanding. The weekend spent in my former suburban home had deeply irritated her. She had expected to be moving into a $2.5 million downtown penthouse with a wealthy corporate titan. Instead, she found herself standing in a dated suburban kitchen, dealing with a man who had just been violently rejected by a property management firm. She was growing increasingly resentful and suspicious of his actual wealth. Later that evening, I received a highly informative text message from the private security firm I had hired to monitor the perimeter of my former residence. The detailed security report indicated that a massive explosive argument had spilled out onto the front driveway. Amber had been screaming at Bradley, throwing her designer purse into the passenger seat of her car. She explicitly threatened to leave him permanently if he did not immediately prove he could provide the luxury lifestyle he had arrogantly promised her. She was tired of his excuses. She was tired of the suburban house. She demanded a grand gesture to compensate for the humiliating loss of the downtown penthouse. Bradley was cornered. His fragile ego simply could not handle the rejection. He could not bear the thought of Amber walking away and exposing him as a complete financial fraud. He needed to secure her affection, and he needed to do it instantly. Driven by pure, desperate panic and fortified by the entirely delusional belief that he was about to become a regional vice president, Bradley made a catastrophic financial decision. The next afternoon, my credit monitoring alerts triggered a massive notification. Because Bradley had stubbornly refused to cooperate with a formal legal separation of our minor shared credit histories during his arrogant rush to force the post-nuptial agreement, I still had peripheral visibility into his hard credit inquiries. He had just authorized a catastrophic hard pull on his heavily damaged credit profile at a high-end luxury automotive dealership. Bradley was buying a Porsche. He walked into the premier exotic car dealership in the city, with his chest puffed out playing the role of an incoming corporate executive. He selected a brand new slate gray Porsche 911 Carrera with a custom red leather interior. It was a vehicle that retailed for well over $130,000. He did not have a single cent of liquid cash to put down as a deposit. His checking accounts were severely depleted, and his stock portfolios were entirely liquidated. He sat in the sleek glass office of the dealership finance manager and aggressively leveraged his anticipated corporate promotion to secure the vehicle. Because his debt-to-income ratio was already a toxic wasteland, the only auto loan he could possibly secure was a deeply predatory subprime financing agreement. The interest rate was absolutely astronomical. The monthly payments were going to be completely suffocating. It was a suicidal financial maneuver. But Bradley did not care about the terrifying numbers on the contract. He only cared about the optics. He signed his name on the dotted line sealing his own financial coffin just so he could drive that slate gray status symbol off the lot and park it directly in front of his demanding mistress. I watched the security camera feed from my former suburban home later that evening. Bradley pulled the roaring sports car into the driveway, revving the powerful engine to announce his arrival. Amber walked out onto the front porch, her previous anger completely evaporating at the sight of the expensive luxury vehicle. She squealed in delight, running down the driveway to run her hands over the pristine paint job. Bradley stepped out of the driver's seat wearing a smug, arrogant grin, leaning against the hood of the car as if he had conquered the entire world. He tossed her the keys and pulled her into a passionate kiss right there in the driveway for all the neighbors to see. He thought he had won her back. He thought the flashy car proved his dominance and secured his romantic future. He truly believed he was a brilliant corporate strategist, successfully navigating a minor rough patch on his inevitable path to immense wealth and power. I sat on my plush velvet sofa in the penthouse, laughing softly at the security footage playing on my tablet. The profound depth of his delusion was almost poetic. He had just shackled himself to a six-figure predatory auto loan based entirely on a promotion he was absolutely never going to receive. He had maxed out his final remaining ounces of credit to appease a mistress who would immediately abandon him the very second the money completely stopped flowing. He was blindly accelerating at top speed directly toward a massive brick wall. My phone rang, pulling my attention away from the security feed. It was the chief executive officer of the Lumiere Group. He was calling to officially finalize the itinerary for the upcoming corporate merger gala. The gala was scheduled to take place at a prestigious five-star hotel ballroom at the end of the month. It was designed to be a massive celebration of the acquisition, an opportunity to introduce the new Lumiere executive board to the acquired company staff, and a formal platform to announce the strategic corporate restructuring. Vanessa, the chief executive officer, said, his voice warm and highly respectful. "We have finalized the seating charts and the presentation schedule. As our newest board member and the primary architect behind our new organic division, your presence on the main stage is absolutely required. We want you to personally deliver the keynote address regarding corporate integrity and operational excellence." I smiled, looking out over the glittering city skyline. "I would be absolutely honored to deliver the keynote address." I replied, my voice steady and completely resolute. "In fact, I have a very specific personnel announcement I would like to make personally during my time on the stage. It concerns the regional vice president position for the newly acquired sales division." The chief executive officer agreed immediately, trusting my strategic judgment completely. We finalized the details of my grand entrance and ended the call. I stood up and walked out onto my private terrace, feeling the cool evening wind against my face. Bradley was currently sitting in the suburbs celebrating a phantom promotion and a predatory car loan. He was eagerly anticipating the corporate gala, completely certain it would be his ultimate coronation. He was entirely unaware that the stage was perfectly set, the trap was fully armed, and I was holding the microphone. The cool evening breeze sweeping across my private penthouse terrace felt like the ultimate confirmation of my impending victory. I turned back inside my luxurious living space and walked over to my heavy oak desk. My secure email portal was already flashing with high-priority messages from the Lumiere Group event coordination team. The official corporate invitations for the upcoming merger gala had just been distributed across Bradley's entire firm. The event was scheduled to take place at the Grand Azure Hotel, which was the absolute most prestigious five-star venue in the entire city. The gala was designed to be a massive, opulent celebration of the acquisition. The corporate overlords were sparing absolutely no expense to impress the acquired staff and formally introduce the new Lumiere executive board to the regional teams. The digital itinerary sent to my private inbox detailed a night of sheer extravagance. There would be a cocktail reception featuring top-tier imported champagne, followed by a formal seated dinner in the main ballroom. The highlight of the evening would be the keynote address and the introduction of the primary shareholders. My name was explicitly highlighted at the very top of the VIP speaker list. The event coordinators had arranged for a private security detail to escort me through a separate VIP entrance, ensuring my identity remained completely concealed from the general staff until the exact moment I stepped onto the main stage. I reviewed the logistics with absolute precision. Everything was meticulously planned to maximize the shock value of my public reveal. While I was finalizing my executive schedule, Bradley was aggressively executing his own delusional plans. Through my continued amicable correspondence with Chloe, I received highly detailed updates regarding his arrogant behavior at the office. Bradley had pulled every conceivable corporate string to secure a block of premium VIP tickets for the gala. He was absolutely convinced that this lavish event was essentially his own personal coronation ceremony. He genuinely believed the Lumiere executives were throwing this massive party to formally announce his promotion to regional vice president. His sheer, unadulterated arrogance had completely blinded him to basic corporate reality. He decided that this glamorous, high-profile event was the absolute perfect opportunity to officially debut his new life. He was going to bring his 26-year-old mistress Amber as his formal plus one. He wanted to parade her around the five-star ballroom to aggressively showcase his newly acquired trophy partner to all of his subordinate colleagues. He was eager to flaunt her in expensive designer dresses, completely ignoring the fact that those dresses were purchased using predatory personal loans that were currently suffocating him financially. But Bradley did not stop with simply bringing his mistress. His enormous, fragile ego demanded a much larger audience for his fabricated triumph. He formally invited his deeply critical mother, Patricia, and his equally condescending sister, Monica, to attend the corporate gala. He wanted his family sitting at a premium table right near the main stage to witness him ascending to the absolute peak of corporate power. He called Patricia and boasted about his guaranteed executive promotion, feeding her lies about his massive incoming salary and his total financial dominance. Patricia and Monica were practically vibrating with shallow excitement. According to Chloe, who had unfortunately run into them at a local upscale boutique, they were aggressively bragging to anyone who would listen about Bradley's massive corporate success. They loudly mocked me during their shopping trip, telling store clerks that Bradley had finally shed his dead-weight wife and was moving on to a much younger, much more sophisticated partner. They enthusiastically maxed out their own credit cards, buying highly expensive formal gowns for the occasion, absolutely certain that Bradley's new executive wealth would soon elevate their own social standing. They were all collectively buying into a glorious, magnificent illusion. Bradley was driving his newly financed Porsche around the city, taking Amber to expensive lunches, and acting like a billionaire titan of industry while literally standing on a trap door that I was about to drop wide open. The week of the gala arrived, bringing a profound sense of total calm over my penthouse. I did not feel a single ounce of anxiety or hesitation. The frantic, desperate energy that used to govern my life when I was married to Bradley had completely evaporated. I was no longer a woman desperately trying to prove her worth to a family that inherently despised her. I was a highly successful, independent multimillionaire, executing a flawless corporate strategy. I scheduled a private appointment at one of the most exclusive couture boutiques in the downtown district. I needed a dress that projected absolute, undeniable authority. I bypassed the standard formal wear and selected a breathtaking custom-designed gown in a deep, rich midnight blue. The fabric was heavy and luxurious, falling in sharp, elegant lines that commanded immediate attention. It featured a high-structured neckline and a dramatic, sweeping train that practically demanded respect. It was not a dress designed to make a man look good. It was a dress designed for a woman who owned the entire room. I paired it with simple, elegant diamond earrings and a sleek, sophisticated hairstyle. When I looked in the three-way mirror, I did not see the exhausted garage business owner Bradley used to mock. I saw a corporate predator ready to strike. 2 days before the event, I engaged in a final secure video conference with the chief executive officer of the Lumiere Group. We carefully reviewed the seating charts for the main ballroom. I noted exactly where Bradley, Amber, Patricia, and Monica were seated. They had been assigned a prominent table right near the front of the stage, exactly as Bradley had arrogantly requested. They would have an absolutely perfect, unobstructed view of my face when the stage lights hit me. I then finalized the specific wording of my keynote address with the corporate communications team. The chief executive officer was fully aware of the massive embezzlement and financial misconduct our audit team had uncovered regarding Bradley's expense accounts. He completely supported my decision to handle the termination publicly. The Lumiere Group maintained a strict zero-tolerance policy for corporate theft, and the executive board agreed that making a harsh, visible example of Bradley would set the perfect tone for the newly acquired company culture. The legal team had already drafted the official termination papers, securing them in a sleek leather folder that would be handed to me right before I walked onto the stage. The evening of the gala finally descended upon the city. The sky faded into a deep, bruised purple as the downtown streetlights flickered to life, reflecting brilliantly off the towering glass skyscrapers. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, holding a single glass of sparkling water. The quiet luxury of my new home was a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I was about to unleash. My reflection in the glass showed a woman radiating absolute control. I smoothed the heavy silk of my midnight blue gown, taking one final deep breath to center my focus. I reviewed my opening lines in my head, ensuring every single syllable was perfectly calibrated to maximize his public humiliation. Down on the bustling city streets, sleek black town cars and luxury limousines were already making their way toward the Grand Azure Hotel. Bradley was undoubtedly sitting in one of them, suffocating in his own cologne, holding Amber's hand and grinning like a fool. He was probably rehearsing the arrogant acceptance speech he planned to give his colleagues. He was actively visualizing the proud tears forming in his mother's eyes when his name was called. He was marching his entire toxic circus directly into the perfectly constructed jaws of my trap. My private security detail knocked softly on the heavy oak penthouse door, signaling that my secure corporate transport had officially arrived. The head of my security team, a broad-shouldered professional named Vance, briefed me on the exact route we would take through the hotel service corridors to completely avoid the main lobby. I nodded, confirming I understood the logistics perfectly. I set my glass down on the console table. I picked up my silver clutch, containing only my lipstick and my solid black private wealth card. I walked out of my sanctuary, stepping confidently into the private elevator. The descent to the ground floor felt smooth and incredibly fast, perfectly matching my racing heartbeat. I was walking straight into the dangerous lion's den, but I possessed absolutely zero fear. I was certainly not walking in today as prey. I was walking in as the undisputed owner of the entire jungle. The Grand Azure Hotel ballroom was an absolute masterpiece of gilded luxury and corporate extravagance. Enormous crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden light over hundreds of executives and industry professionals. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, their music mingling with the clinking of expensive crystal and the low hum of corporate networking. The Lumiere Group had transformed the venue into a breathtaking display of their immense wealth and absolute dominance. Massive floral arrangements of white orchids and deep blue hydrangeas towered over the tables. The open bars were fully stocked with top-tier imported champagne and premium spirits. It was exactly the kind of opulent environment Bradley believed he rightfully belonged in. He pulled his newly financed slate gray Porsche into the crowded valet line at the front of the hotel, ensuring he aggressively revved the engine one final time before handing the keys to the attendant. He wanted everyone lingering near the grand entrance to see him step out of the expensive sports car. He walked through the massive revolving glass doors, with his chest puffed out, projecting the manufactured aura of a conquering hero. Amber clung tightly to his right arm, wearing a sequined crimson dress that was entirely too flashy for a conservative corporate event. But Bradley did not care about professional optics tonight. He only cared about showing off his young trophy. Trailing closely behind them were Patricia and Monica. They walked into the grand lobby with their heads held high, radiating an unearned sense of aristocratic superiority. They had both maxed out their remaining credit limits to purchase expensive formal wear, desperately trying to look like the matriarch and sister of a wealthy corporate titan. Patricia wore a heavy emerald green gown, paired with a set of diamond earrings she had aggressively demanded Bradley buy for her to celebrate his impending promotion. Monica wore a tight silver dress that she constantly adjusted, looking down her nose at the junior staff members who were respectfully making their way toward the ballroom. Bradley led his toxic entourage through the crowded reception area like a general inspecting his troops. He actively sought out his former peers and subordinate colleagues, stopping to shake hands and aggressively slap shoulders. He introduced Amber to everyone not as a junior sales associate, but as his dedicated partner, making it entirely clear that he had upgraded his romantic life to match his impending corporate elevation. He spoke loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear boasting about his private meetings with the transition team and hinting heavily that major structural changes were coming to the sales division under his new anticipated leadership. He pointed out his assigned seating to a group of nervous account managers. He bragged that the Lumiere executives had specifically placed him at a premium VIP table located directly adjacent to the main stage. He told them it was a clear, undeniable signal of his ultimate value to the new parent company. His mother and sister nodded proudly behind him, validating every single arrogant lie he projected into the room. He was completely intoxicated by his own fabricated reality, deeply convinced that tonight was the official beginning of his glorious new life. While Bradley was busy parading his mistress around the reception hall, I had already bypassed the main lobby entirely. My private security detail escorted me through a highly secure subterranean entrance utilized exclusively for high-profile VIP guests and keynote speakers. I waited comfortably in a lavish private green room located directly behind the main stage. The event coordinators offered me sparkling water and reviewed the final production cues for my upcoming presentation, but sitting safely behind the heavy velvet curtains felt entirely too passive. I wanted to feel the energy of the room. I wanted to stand in the very center of the corporate jungle I now effectively owned. I instructed my lead security guard Vance to escort me to the main ballroom floor for a brief moment before the seated dinner officially began. He nodded, signaling the other guards to maintain a discreet but watchful perimeter. I walked out into the glittering ballroom, feeling the heavy, luxurious silk of my midnight blue couture gown sweeping elegantly across the polished marble floor. I navigated through the sea of dark suits and evening gowns, moving with an absolute quiet authority that naturally parted the crowd. I positioned myself near a massive, towering pyramid of crystal champagne coupes located near the center of the room. I accepted a fresh glass from a passing waiter and turned to survey the vast networking event. It took exactly 4 minutes for the inevitable collision to occur. Bradley was aggressively charting a path toward the premium open bar with Amber, Patricia, and Monica in tow when he suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. I watched his eyes lock onto my figure from across the room. For a fraction of a second, a flash of genuine pure shock registered on his face. He blinked as if his brain completely refused to process the visual information. He looked at my sophisticated styling, the flawless, expensive tailoring of my gown, and the absolute serene confidence radiating from my posture. Then his fragile ego violently reasserted control. The shock melted rapidly away, entirely replaced by a familiar, cruel, arrogant smirk. He leaned down and whispered something into Amber's ear, causing her to let out a loud, mocking laugh. He gestured for his mother and sister to follow him as he marched directly toward my position by the champagne tower. He was completely convinced he was about to deliver a crushing public humiliation. "Well, well, well," Bradley said, his voice dripping with condescension as he stopped just 2 feet away from me. "I honestly did not think you would have the nerve to show your face in public, Vanessa, let alone crash a private corporate gala." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, perfectly maintaining my eye contact. I did not shrink back. I did not break my posture. "Good evening, Bradley. Amber, Patricia, Monica, I hope you are all enjoying the champagne." Amber let out a theatrical sigh, shifting her weight to her other hip. "Bradley, is this the freeloading ex-wife you told me about?" she asked, pretending to examine her manicured nails. "I thought you said she was living out of her car by now." Bradley chuckled, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "I honestly assumed she was." "Tell me, Vanessa, how did you even get past the security desk at the front doors? Did you sneak in through the kitchen loading dock? Or did the catering company finally hire you to wash dishes for the evening? I know you must be absolutely desperate for cash, since I legally cut off your access to my bank accounts." Before I could even formulate a response, Monica aggressively stepped forward, narrowing her eyes as she closely inspected my midnight blue gown. She let out a sharp, derogatory scoff. "Is that supposed to be couture?" she asked, her tone loud enough to attract the attention of the nearby executives. "It looks like a cheap, terrible knockoff from a discount department store." I suppose when you are completely unemployed and begging for scraps, you have to settle for imitation fabrics. You look absolutely ridiculous standing in a room full of actual successful professionals, Vanessa. Patricia immediately chimed in, stepping up beside her daughter to reinforce the unprovoked attack. It is honestly pathetic, Vanessa, showing up uninvited to my son's prestigious corporate event just to stalk him. You are clearly desperate to win him back now that you realize how impossible it is to survive without his financial support. But you need to accept reality. Bradley is moving on to a much brighter future with Amber. He is about to be named a regional vice president tonight. You have absolutely no place in his new wealthy lifestyle. You need to put your cheap little glass down and leave through the back door before he calls hotel security to have you forcibly removed for trespassing. They stood there like a pack of rabid wolves, completely unified in their cruel delusion. They were aggressively projecting their own shallow insecurities directly onto me. They expected me to flush bright red with deep public embarrassment. They waited eagerly for my eyes to fill with humiliated tears. They wanted me to turn and run away in absolute shame, proving their superiority to the entire room of watching corporate elites. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or rush to defend the authenticity of my custom-tailored dress. I simply stood there surrounded by the glittering lights of the ballroom and offered them a perfectly serene, chillingly calm smile. The absolute lack of fear or intimidation in my expression caused Bradley's confident smirk to falter slightly. A tiny microscopic fraction of doubt finally flickered behind his arrogant eyes. "I am not here to win you back, Bradley," I said, my voice smooth, low, and carrying an absolute terrifying weight. "I would not take you back if you handed me the entire world on a silver platter. I am simply here to enjoy the celebration." Bradley scoffed aggressively, trying to regain his footing. "There is nothing for you to celebrate here, Vanessa. This event is for the Lumiere Group elite and the top-tier management they are retaining. You are a nobody who sells homemade lotion out of a garage. You do not belong in this building. Now put the drink down and walk away before I have the guards drag you out into the street." I took one final elegant sip of my champagne and gracefully placed the crystal flute onto a passing waiter's silver tray. I looked directly into Bradley's angry, arrogant eyes and let my serene smile widen into something sharp and absolute. "I highly suggest you find your assigned seat at that premium VIP table." "Bradley," I said, my tone perfectly conversational, but laced with a lethal, undeniable promise. "You are going to want to sit down and pay very close attention to the keynote speech tonight. It is going to be an announcement you will remember for the rest of your entire life." I did not wait for him to formulate a response. I did not give Patricia or Monica another glance. I simply turned on my heel and walked gracefully away toward the heavy velvet curtains separating the main floor from the private backstage area. Two massive security guards wearing earpieces immediately stepped aside to let me pass, dropping the velvet ropes exclusively for my entry. I heard Amber let out a confused, irritated noise behind me, and I heard Bradley aggressively demand to know where I was going. But I did not look back. I stepped into the quiet shadows of the VIP corridor, leaving them standing entirely confused, holding their drinks on the ballroom floor. The music swelled, the lights began to dim, and the final execution was officially underway. The heavy velvet curtains closed behind me, muffling the ambient noise of the grand ballroom. I stood in the quiet darkness of the backstage corridor, surrounded by my private security detail. Through the thick fabric, I heard the live jazz quartet abruptly stop playing. A low, resonant chime echoed through the sophisticated sound system, signaling the formal transition of the evening. The main overhead chandeliers dimmed, casting the vast room into a dramatic, hushed twilight. A single brilliant spotlight illuminated the center of the massive stage, piercing through the shadows. The chief executive officer of the Lumiere Group walked out into the blinding light. He was a distinguished man with an imposing presence, radiating the kind of effortless authority that only comes from decades of managing international empires. The restless chatter of hundreds of executives and regional managers instantly evaporated into a tense, expectant silence. I watched him approach the clear acrylic podium from my concealed vantage point offstage, waiting for the exact perfect moment to strike. Good evening, he began, his rich voice projecting flawlessly across the silent ballroom. Tonight we are gathered to celebrate a monumental integration of global resources. The Lumiere Group has always prided itself on identifying unmatched potential and ruthlessly acquiring it. We demand excellence, transparency, and absolute integrity from every single individual who operates under our corporate umbrella. This recent acquisition represents a massive leap forward for our distribution logistics. He paused, resting his hands firmly on the edges of the podium, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the anxious crowd. However, he continued, a strategic corporate maneuver of this massive scale does not happen by accident. It requires a visionary architect. It requires a relentless leader who understands both the microeconomics of grassroots brand building and the macroeconomics of international corporate distribution. The acquisition of this regional firm was not my original concept. It was aggressively spearheaded by the newest member of our executive board. The crowd leaned forward, collectively holding their breath. I could easily picture Bradley sitting at his premium VIP table, practically vibrating with arrogant anticipation, completely convinced the chief executive officer was about to pivot to his promotion. This extraordinary woman recently sold her own independent organic cosmetics company, Botanica Pure, to our conglomerate for a staggering $18 million, the chief executive officer announced, his voice rising with genuine immense admiration. Instead of taking her massive payout and quietly retiring, she demanded a highly influential seat at our table. She took a huge equity stake in the Lumiere Group, and she personally engineered the hostile takeover of this very distribution firm. It is my absolute distinct honor to introduce our newest majority shareholder and your new ultimate superior. Please welcome Vanessa to the stage. The heavy velvet curtains parted, instantly pulled back by the backstage security team. The spotlight aggressively swung away from the podium and hit me directly. I stepped out from the shadows and walked slowly onto the polished stage. The midnight blue silk of my custom couture gown caught the bright light, shimmering with a predatory, unyielding elegance. My heels clicked sharply against the wooden floorboards, echoing through the vast, cavernous room like the ticking of a clock. A collective stunned gasp rippled violently through the entire ballroom. Hundreds of corporate professionals stared up at me in absolute shock, trying to process the revelation that a 33-year-old woman was their new corporate overlord. But I was not looking at the general crowd. My eyes locked immediately onto the premium VIP table situated directly front and center. The physical transformation of Bradley was a spectacular masterpiece of human devastation. His arrogant, confident posture completely collapsed. The smug, arrogant smile he had worn for 5 consecutive years physically dropped from his face, as if all the muscles in his jaw had suddenly been severed. He stared up at me with wide, terrified, unblinking eyes, his face draining of all color until he looked like a sickening shade of chalky gray. He gripped the edge of the linen-covered table, his knuckles turning stark white as his brain desperately tried and utterly failed to process the apocalyptic reality standing right in front of him. His dead-weight, freeloading wife was the $18 million genius who had just bought his entire corporate existence. Beside him, Patricia experienced a total system failure. She was holding a crystal flute of expensive imported champagne halfway to her mouth. When my name was announced and I stepped into the bright light, her fingers simply went completely limp. The delicate glass slipped from her grasp, plummeting downward. It hit the solid marble floor with a sharp, violently loud crash that echoed clearly throughout the dead-silent ballroom. The crystal shattered into 1,000 tiny, glittering fragments, spraying expensive alcohol across the hem of her heavily financed emerald gown. She did not even blink or look down at the mess. She just stared at me, her jaw hanging completely slack in absolute, unadulterated horror. Monica sat frozen beside her, looking as though all the breathable air had been violently sucked out of her lungs. And then there was Amber, the demanding 26-year-old mistress who had mocked my home office and demanded a luxury downtown penthouse. She was sitting next to Bradley wearing her flashy crimson dress. When she realized exactly who I was and what my profound presence on that stage truly meant. Her entire demeanor shattered. She physically recoiled, sinking low into her expensive upholstered chair. She turned her body away from the bright stage lights, trying desperately to shrink down and hide her face behind a massive structural pillar located near their table. She instantly realized that the wealthy corporate titan she thought she was dating was actually a completely powerless fraud whose entire career was now resting squarely in the palm of my hand. I reached the center of the stage. The chief executive officer smiled warmly, stepping back and offering me the microphone. I took it from him, feeling the cool, heavy metal against my palm. I did not rush. I stood there for a long, deliberate moment, looking down at Bradley, letting the suffocating silence stretch out, letting the sheer, unyielding terror fully marinate in his system. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of emotional distress. I spoke with a terrifying, absolute professional calm that commanded immediate total obedience from everyone in the room. "Good evening," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated, echoing off the high gilded ceilings. "As your new majority shareholder, my first official directive was to initiate a comprehensive, ruthless financial audit of all incoming assets and personnel from this newly acquired firm. At the Lumiere Group, we pride ourselves on pristine, immaculate financial hygiene. We do not tolerate inefficiency. We absolutely do not tolerate waste. And above all else, we categorically refuse to tolerate corporate theft." The temperature in this massive ballroom seemed to plummet 20 degrees. The executives sitting at the surrounding tables shifted nervously in their seats, sensing the sudden lethal shift in my tone. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Bradley, holding him hostage with my unrelenting gaze. During our aggressive transition audit, I continued pacing slowly across the stage, my voice ringing with undeniable absolute authority. Our accounting teams uncovered a highly disturbing pattern of gross financial misconduct within the regional sales division. We discovered extensive, deliberate embezzlement of corporate funds. We found heavily manipulated expense reports, fraudulent client entertainment invoices, and unauthorized charges systematically buried within complex departmental budgets. Bradley began to visibly physically shake. He reached up and tugged desperately at his expensive silk tie, suddenly finding it incredibly difficult to breathe. He was silently begging me with his wide, terrified eyes, pleading with me not to do this in front of his mother, his sister, his mistress, and his entire professional network. I offered him absolutely no mercy. "Corporate credit accounts," I said, my voice dropping an octave into a cold, lethal register, were illicitly utilized to fund highly inappropriate personal expenses. Our forensic accountants tracked thousands of dollars fraudulently billed as mandatory leadership conferences and executive networking events. These funds were in reality deliberately misappropriated to finance luxury ski vacations to exclusive VIP resorts in Aspen, Colorado. A loud, shocked murmur erupted from the tables surrounding Bradley. His colleagues turned to look at him, their expressions shifting from professional confusion to utter, absolute disgust. Patricia let out a soft, choked gasp, pressing a trembling hand over her mouth as the horrific truth about her perfect golden son was broadcast to the entire room. Furthermore, I stated, cutting effortlessly through the rising murmurs, the audit revealed that these stolen corporate funds were repeatedly utilized to purchase lavish, unauthorized luxury gifts for a direct subordinate junior sales associate within the very same division. This constitutes a severe, egregious violation of our corporate ethics policy, our strict fraternization protocols, and federal embezzlement statutes. Amber squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her hands over her face completely, mortified as several people at their table openly turned to stare directly at her. She was being publicly branded as a complicit participant in corporate theft in front of her entire industry. I stopped pacing and stood perfectly still, positioning myself directly over Bradley at the very edge of the stage. I looked down at the man who had ordered me to vacate my own home, who had viciously mocked my ambition, who had proudly handed me a post-nuptial agreement to aggressively protect his wealth. "Bradley," I said, stating his name clearly and sharply into the microphone, ensuring every single person heard it. Your flagrant theft, your severe professional incompetence, and your complete lack of basic integrity are a massive, profound liability to this corporation. Your aggressive financial mismanagement has cost this company thousands of dollars, and your fabricated expense reports are currently being handed over to our corporate legal team for thorough criminal review. He opened his mouth trying to formulate a defense, trying to speak, but no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his absolute public destruction. "You are not a leader, Bradley," I announced, my voice echoing with absolute terrifying finality. "You are a profound disappointment and a massive financial risk that I refuse to carry. Effective immediately, your employment with this firm is officially permanently terminated. You are fired. Security will escort you from this building right now." I lowered the microphone, turning away from him, as two massive security guards approached his table. The public execution was completely flawless and absolutely final. The two massive security guards descended upon Bradley with swift professional efficiency. They flanked his premium leather chair, grabbing him firmly by his upper arms and pulling him roughly to his feet. He stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished marble floor. The entire grand ballroom watched in absolute stunned silence as their former corporate golden boy was physically removed from the premises. He tried to resist, twisting his shoulders and protesting loudly, but the trained guards were entirely uncompromising. They marched him directly down the center aisle, forcing him to endure the disgusted, judgmental stares of every single executive and regional manager he had arrogantly insulted over the past 5 years. I did not stay to watch his humiliating parade through the main doors. I turned and walked gracefully back into the shadows of the VIP corridor, my own private security team surrounding me. I moved with purposeful, elegant strides, navigating the quiet, carpeted hallways that led directly toward the grand front lobby of the hotel. I knew exactly where the hotel's security protocols dictated they would take a terminated individual. I wanted to be waiting for him when the final initial shock wore off and the desperate reality of his complete financial annihilation fully set in. The heavy double doors of the service corridor swung open, and I stepped out into the bright, opulent expanse of the main hotel lobby. The massive space was mostly empty, save for a few night shift concierges standing behind the mahogany reception desks and the valet attendants waiting outside the revolving glass doors. I stood near a massive indoor water fountain, listening to the rhythmic, soothing splashing of the water. Less than a minute later, the side lobby doors burst wide open. The security guards shoved Bradley into the bright space, with Patricia, Monica, and Amber scrambling frantically close behind him. Bradley was completely unhinged. His designer suit jacket was violently rumpled. His expensive silk tie hung askew, and his carefully styled hair was a frantic, wild mess. He was loudly arguing with the guards, demanding they release him, screaming about his legal rights and his prestigious corporate standing. Then his wild, frantic eyes landed on me standing peacefully by the fountain. He tore himself away from the guards and lunged toward me, stopping only when my personal security detail immediately stepped forward, forming a solid, impenetrable human wall between us. "Vanessa," he gasped, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. "Vanessa, you cannot do this to me. You cannot just fire me in front of the entire industry. I am your husband. We are a family. You are making a massive mistake." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, clinical detachment. "You ceased being my family the exact moment you brought your young mistress into my home and handed me a 30-day eviction notice, Bradley," I said, my voice echoing cleanly across the quiet marble lobby. "You fired yourself the moment you decided to embezzle corporate funds to finance your pathetic double life. I simply delivered the official message on behalf of the board." His sheer desperation instantly morphed into an aggressive, toxic entitlement. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at me. "You owe me, Vanessa!" he screamed, his face turning an ugly, mottled shade of purple. "I supported you for 4 consecutive years while you played around in that garage. You just sold a company for $18 million. That is joint marital property. We are still legally married, and I am absolutely entitled to half of that payout. You cannot just walk away with a massive fortune and leave me with nothing. I will take you to court. I will hire the most aggressive divorce lawyers in the city. I will completely strip you of everything you own." He was shouting now, completely losing any remaining shred of his corporate dignity. He truly believed his marital status was his ultimate safety net. He genuinely thought the family court system would blindly reward his prolonged financial abuse and save him from his own catastrophic mistakes. I slowly reached into my sleek silver clutch. I did not pull out a tissue or a cell phone. I pulled out a pristine, perfectly folded document printed on thick, heavy legal paper. I calmly unfolded it and held it up so the bright lobby lights fully illuminated the dense text. Bradley stared at the document, his angry rant slowly dying in his dry throat as he recognized the bold black lettering at the very top of the page. It was a certified copy of the exact post-nuptial agreement he had aggressively slammed onto our kitchen counter just days ago. "Did you genuinely forget about this legally binding document so quickly, Bradley?" I asked, keeping my tone incredibly soft and absolutely lethal. "You were so incredibly eager to protect your massive corporate salary from my little homemade lotion hobby. You hired an expensive, aggressive lawyer to ensure this contract was completely ironclad. You forced me to sign it, demanding total, absolute financial separation." I looked down at the highlighted clauses, deliberately reading his own devastating demands right back to him. "All assets, debts, and incomes are 100% separate effective immediately upon signature. Neither party shall possess any right, title, or interest in the separate property or future income of the other party." I looked back up at his horrified, bloodless face. "You demanded 100% separate finances, Bradley. You legally signed away your right to a single cent of my $18 million payout before the corporate funds ever hit my private account. You also legally isolated all of your massive predatory personal loans completely to yourself. You get absolutely nothing from me. You completely trapped yourself." The absolute sheer magnitude of his fatal miscalculation finally crashed down upon him. His knees physically buckled under the immense weight of his total ruin. He stumbled backward, hitting a heavy marble column and sliding down until he was sitting pathetically on the polished floor. He buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a loud, agonizing sob. He had willfully and aggressively legally locked himself out of a massive fortune solely because of his own arrogant, blinding greed. Amber had been standing a few feet away, watching the entire exchange with wide, terrified eyes. She finally stepped forward, but she did not go to comfort the man she claimed to love. She looked down at him sitting on the lobby floor like a broken, miserable child. "Bradley," she said, her voice shrill and extremely demanding. "Tell me you still have your generous corporate severance package. Tell me we can still afford the lease on that downtown apartment. You promised me a luxury lifestyle." Bradley looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen. "I was fired for cause, Amber," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "The company caught me embezzling federal funds. I do not get a severance package. I have absolutely nothing left. The banks are going to foreclose on my house because I cannot pay the mortgage." Amber stared at him in utter, absolute disgust, her carefully painted face twisted into a mask of pure revulsion. "You bought me those expensive gifts with stolen corporate funds," she shrieked, taking a sudden step away from him. "You deliberately implicated me in a federal embezzlement investigation. I am a junior associate. My entire career in this industry is completely ruined because of your stupid, reckless lies. You are completely pathetic, Bradley." She turned her back on him without a single ounce of hesitation or pity. "We are entirely done," she spat over her shoulder. "Do not ever contact me again." She marched fiercely across the lobby, her high heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and walked out the revolving glass doors, abandoning him completely to his misery. Patricia and Monica had been watching the horrific scene unfold in absolute stunned silence. When Amber walked out, they finally seemed to realize the true catastrophic reality of the situation. Their golden child was completely financially ruined, and the woman they had relentlessly mocked and degraded for years was now a highly influential multimillionaire. Patricia took a hesitant, desperate step toward me. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, tears streaming heavily down her carefully made-up face. "Vanessa, please. Patricia begged, her voice trembling with manufactured artificial sincerity. Please, you have to help us. He is your husband. We are your family. You cannot just leave him sitting here like this. We will apologize for everything we said at the restaurant. We will do whatever you want. Please do not let him lose his home and his future. Monica stepped up beside her mother, nodding frantically, her aristocratic pride completely gone. We were wrong, Vanessa. We were so incredibly wrong about you and your business. Please just give him a small loan, just enough to save the house and pay off his car. You have $18 million. You can easily afford to help your own family during a crisis. I looked at the two women who had spent years making my life a living hell. I remembered the high-end steakhouse. I remembered the $800 bill they refused to pay. I remembered Patricia calling me a leech and Monica mocking my clothes. They were openly begging me for charity, abandoning all their previous superiority the very second they realized I held all the wealth and power they so desperately worshipped. I did not smile. I did not gloat or raise my voice. I did not waste a single breath arguing with their pathetic hypocrisy. I simply signaled my security detail with a subtle, graceful nod of my head. The professional guards formed a tight protective circle around me, physically parting the desperate remnants of Bradley's toxic family. I walked straight past Patricia and Monica, maintaining my perfect posture and my absolute serene confidence. I did not offer them a single comforting word. I walked out through the heavy glass doors, stepping into the cool night air, leaving them completely trapped in the humiliating, financially devastating reality they had proudly built for themselves. The cool night air of the city felt incredibly crisp and clean as I stepped into my waiting transport. I left the hotel behind and returned to my sanctuary in the sky. Over the next several weeks, the profound silence of my new life was wonderfully undisturbed by Bradley or his toxic family. But his financial reality was making an incredible amount of noise in the public record. Without his six-figure corporate salary, his fragile house of cards completely collapsed with terrifying speed. The predatory loans he took out to impress Amber reached their aggressive maturation dates. The exorbitant subprime financing on the slate gray Porsche immediately defaulted, resulting in a highly embarrassing public repossession right out of a cheap motel parking lot where he was temporarily staying. Because he was terminated for severe gross misconduct and federal embezzlement, he was legally disqualified from receiving unemployment benefits. His primary bank accounts were permanently frozen pending the corporate legal investigation. He had absolutely zero incoming revenue to cover the massive mortgage on the sprawling suburban home he had so proudly evicted me from. The foreclosure process was initiated by his primary lender with ruthless corporate efficiency. He received formal notice to vacate the very same property he had arrogantly claimed was his sole domain. The bank quickly seized the suburban house and listed it for a rapid public auction to aggressively recoup their financial losses. I sat in my luxurious downtown office monitoring the public real estate listings with my wealth management attorney Harrison. I instructed him to utilize Nova Sterling Holdings to actively participate in the local bank auction. Because the property carried a severe stigma of sudden foreclosure and required significant cosmetic updating to clear out the heavy dated energy Amber had so loudly complained about, the bidding pool was incredibly small. Through my anonymous holding company, I purchased the entire suburban property in pure cash for absolute pennies on the dollar. I essentially bought back the very house I had helped finance at a massive, devastating discount. But I had absolutely no intention of ever living within those walls again, or flipping it for a standard real estate profit. That house represented years of suffocating control, stifled ambition, and conditional toxic partnerships. I wanted it entirely erased from the earth. I hired a premier commercial demolition crew to completely bulldoze the structure. I stood across the street on a crisp Tuesday morning holding a cup of artisan coffee and watched the massive yellow machinery tear through the pristine roof. I watched the heavy steel claws rip through the custom mahogany wine cabinet Bradley had locked me out of. I watched the walls of the garage where I had tirelessly built an $18 million empire turn into a pile of shattered drywall and splintered wood. The physical destruction of that house was the ultimate profound closure. In its place, Nova Sterling Holdings fully funded the construction of a beautiful, expansive community garden and a state-of-the-art business training center. The facility was explicitly dedicated to supporting aspiring female entrepreneurs who lacked access to traditional venture capital. It was designed to provide free legal counseling, professional mentorship, and safe functional workspaces for women trying to build their own independent businesses. I transformed the exact location where Bradley had aggressively tried to crush my ambition into a permanent, thriving sanctuary designed to violently nurture the ambition of hundreds of other women. A month after the demolition was completed, I stood on the expansive private balcony of my downtown penthouse. This was the exact luxury property Bradley had desperately tried to secure to house his 26-year-old mistress. Now it was my exclusive personal domain. The evening air was warm and pleasant. The setting sun painted the towering glass skyscrapers in brilliant shades of fiery orange and deep bruised purple. I rested my hands on the smooth glass railing, looking out over the sprawling city that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. I wore a simple, elegant silk robe, feeling completely untethered from the heavy, suffocating weight of my past. I had entirely secured my wealth, my reputation, and my profound personal peace. My personal cell phone vibrated softly against the sleek outdoor patio table. I walked over and picked it up. The screen displayed a lengthy incoming text message from an unsaved number. I immediately recognized the desperate, frantic tone of the writing. It was Bradley. He had clearly acquired a cheap prepaid phone because I had permanently blocked his primary number weeks ago. The message was a pathetic, rambling monument to his total, absolute ruin. "Vanessa, please read this." He wrote his desperation practically bleeding through the digital text. "I have absolutely nothing left. The bank took the house and the car. My mother and sister refused to speak to me because I asked them to co-sign a consolidation loan. No reputable firm in the city will hire me because of the Lumiere Group investigation. I am currently facing total catastrophic bankruptcy. I know I treated you terribly. I know I was completely wrong about everything. But you have $18 million. You have more money than you could ever possibly need. I am begging you to please just send a small personal loan so I can hire a decent bankruptcy attorney and secure a cheap apartment. Please, Vanessa, you are the only person who can help me. I am literally begging you." I stared at the glowing screen reading his pathetic, groveling words. The man who had arrogantly demanded a total financial separation. The man who had ordered me to pay rent in my own home. The man who had proudly paraded his mistress in front of me was now desperately begging for my charity. He expected my inherent kindness to override his prolonged aggressive abuse. He truly believed that my massive wealth would somehow erase the profound, undeniable cruelty of his past actions. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy. I did not feel the slightest twinge of guilt or moral obligation. I opened my digital banking applications and navigated directly to the Venmo platform. I bypassed the standard messaging application entirely. I found his old active digital payment profile, the very same profile he had used to relentlessly nickel and dime me over shared utility bills and hardware store padlocks. I initiated a formal payment request. I typed in the exact amount of $42.50. I moved to the memo line, keeping my fingers perfectly steady. I typed a brief, highly specific message. Half the groceries from last month. I added a single cheerful smiling emoji to the end of the text. I pressed send. The application chimed softly, confirming the request had been successfully delivered directly to his phone. I immediately navigated to my phone settings and permanently blocked his new prepaid number. I then powered the device down completely, watching the screen fade to absolute black. I tossed the useless piece of technology onto the patio table and turned my attention back to the breathtaking city skyline. I walked over to the outdoor bar cart and picked up a chilled bottle of imported vintage champagne. I popped the cork with a satisfying loud snap, pouring the bubbling golden liquid into a tall crystal flute. I walked back to the edge of the glass balcony, raising my glass to the fading sunlight. I was 33 years old. I was the sole owner of a massive, unencumbered fortune. I held a highly influential seat on an international corporate board, and I answered to absolutely no one but myself. I took a slow, luxurious sip of the champagne, savoring the crisp, clean taste of my new, entirely independent life. The war was officially permanently over, and I had won everything.